You are now listening to a hockey romance audiobook authored by Triple G. Chapter 1. Jax Kane's truck rumbled down the familiar stretch of highway, the snow-laden trees casting long shadows across the road as the sun dipped below the mountains. Lake Placid hadn't changed much, at least not on the surface. The same mom-and-pop shops stood stubbornly against time, their neon signs flickering in the twilight. The same brittle air curled through the streets, biting at exposed skin, carrying the distant sound of skates slicing into ice. It was the kind of place that lived and breathed hockey, where the sport was more than just a pastime, it was a way of life. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles stiff, aching from years of abuse. His body had been molded by the game, hardened by the countless fights he had once embraced as a necessity. The enforcer. The bruiser. Razor Kane. The name still followed him like a ghost. The battered truck sputtered slightly as he turned into the lot of Ironwood Arena. The old marquee out front, its letters chipped and dimly lit, announced the upcoming home opener. LYNX vs Falcons, home opener, 7 p.m. The sign had seen better days, but then again, so had he. He cut the engine and sat in silence, listening to the low hum of a hockey broadcast still playing through the static of his radio. His stomach twisted. He recognized the commentator's voice, the same voice that had once called his name in NHL highlight reels. The same voice that had dissected his downfall in excruciating detail. Kane's got a reputation, an enforcer, a bruiser. But that hit crossed a line. He switched off the radio. For a moment, he considered lighting a cigarette, but he'd given that up months ago, along with a handful of other vices. Recovery was a funny thing. 2 steps forward, 1 punch in the gut back. Jax exhaled sharply and shoved open the door, stepping into the cold. His boots crunched against the frozen pavement as he pulled his coat tighter around him. People had already noticed him. A gas station attendant across the street nudged a coworker, murmuring something under his breath. A teenager in a Lynx hoodie whispered to his friend, eyes darting toward him. The weight of recognition settled over Jax like a suffocating blanket, familiar and unwelcome. He pushed through the arena's doors, the blast of frigid rink air hitting him immediately, carrying the scent of old sweat, damp gear, and sharpened skates. It was a smell that had once meant everything to him. The arena wasn't what it used to be. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the boards around the rink were scuffed and yellowing. The bleachers were only half filled with parents and die-hard fans who still clung to the hope that their town's junior team could be something again. At center ice, players were wrapping up their evening drills, their sticks tapping against the ice, voices echoing in sharp bursts. A whistle blew, and the skaters slowly filtered off, leaving the rink empty once more. Jax moved deeper into the arena, his footsteps heavy against the concrete floor. He passed trophy cases displaying the team's past glory, photographs of championship wins, players hoisting cups overhead, memories frozen in time. And there, tucked in among them, was a photo of him. He was barely 17 in the image, his face younger, cleaner, his eyes filled with something close to hope. He stood beside Viktor Petrov, his old coach, the man who had shaped him as a player and in many ways as a man. "I never thought I'd see you back here, Kane." The voice was rough with age, but unmistakable. Jax turned to see Viktor standing near the player's bench, leaning heavily on a cane. Time had taken its toll on him. His once powerful frame had withered slightly, his sharp eyes clouded by age. But the presence was still there, the quiet authority that had once made Jax listen even when he wanted to rebel. "Coach," Jax said, the word foreign in his mouth after so many years. Viktor studied him for a long moment before offering a curt nod. "You look like hell." Jax gave a dry chuckle. "Feels about right." There was no need for small talk. They both knew why he was here. "So," Viktor finally said, "you're serious about coaching?" Jax exhaled, glancing back at the empty rink. "That's the plan." Viktor's gaze lingered on him, as if trying to see past the man he had become to the boy he once was. "You skated yet?" Jax shook his head. Viktor tapped his cane against the boards. "Go on then. Ice doesn't care about your past. Let's see if your feet remember." Jax hesitated for half a second, then moved to the bench, pulling off his boots and lacing up a pair of skates Viktor had waiting. His size. Of course, the old man had known he'd show up eventually. The first step onto the ice was tentative, but as soon as the steel of his blades touched the frozen surface, something inside him shifted. Muscle memory took over, and he pushed off, gliding forward. He took a few slow laps around the rink, getting a feel for it again. The years had stripped away some of his speed, but the control was still there, the instinct, the way he could cut into the ice and shift his weight like he was born for it. For the first time in a long time, he felt something close to right. But then he caught his reflection in the glass. The man staring back at him wasn't the same kid from the photo. His face was leaner, harder. The scars on his knuckles, the tension in his shoulders. It all told a different story now. He wasn't here to reclaim the past. He was here to prove he could be something more than what it had turned him into. Pulling to a stop, he exhaled, stepping off the ice and unlacing his skates. He didn't need to say anything. Victor had seen enough. As he made his way toward the exit, a flicker of movement caught his eye near the stands. A child, small and bundled in a thick winter coat, stood half hidden in the shadows, watching him. The boy didn't flinch when Jax met his gaze. He just stood there, quiet, eyes wide and knowing. A strange feeling settled in Jax's chest. Something about the kid's stare felt familiar. He frowned slightly, but before he could say anything, the boy turned and disappeared into the shadows. Jax shook off the unease and stepped outside into the night air. The cold bit at his skin, but it wasn't enough to shake the feeling gnawing at him. Lake Placid hadn't changed much. But something told him that his past wasn't done with him yet. Chapter 2. The morning was crisp, the kind that burned the lungs when breathed too deep. A pale sun tried to break through the thick gray clouds, but the overcast sky stubbornly held its grip. The parking lot outside Ironwood Arena was still half empty when Jax Kane pulled in, the scent of freshly fallen snow mingling with the sharper bite of gasoline and rubber from the few parked cars. Jax stepped out of his truck and rolled his shoulders. The soreness from yesterday's brief skate clung to his muscles, a dull ache reminding him of all the years spent battering his body in ways it was never meant to endure. He had been built for punishment, and in return, it had cost him more than he'd ever anticipated. Inside the arena, the fluorescent lights flickered to life overhead as he pushed open the doors. A few players were already there, tying laces, taping sticks, and giving him sideways glances as he walked in. He knew what they were thinking. They had all heard about him. Some of them had probably watched clips of his fights on YouTube, grainy replays of him dropping gloves and landing blows that had made crowds roar. Others, the ones old enough to remember, likely recalled his scandal, how his career had ended in disgrace, how the league had turned its back on him. He met their stares head-on, silent and unreadable. A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by the steady tap of a cane against the concrete floor. Viktor Petrov stepped onto the ice, his movements slower than they had once been but no less commanding. He surveyed the group with the same quiet authority he had always carried, eyes keen despite his weathered face. "All right," Viktor called, his voice gruff. "We have a new coach. You know who he is. I don't need to waste time introducing him." A ripple of tension spread through the players, some shifting uncomfortably, others exchanging quick glances. "Jax Kane," Viktor continued, his gaze moving over the group, daring any of them to challenge him. "Some of you are too young to remember what he was before the NHL. But I do. He was the best goddamn forward I ever coached, and if he says he can make you better, you listen. If you don't like it, find another team." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut through. Jax stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried the weight of something unshakable. "I don't care about what you've heard," he said. "I'm not here to be your friend. I'm not here to be your enemy either. I'm here to make you better. You listen, you work, or you sit the hell down. That's the deal." A murmur ran through the players. Some of them were too young, too cocky, and Jax could already see the ones who would test him first. A few others, though, met his gaze with something closer to curiosity. One of them, a tall kid with sharp features and an air of quiet arrogance, leaned against the boards, arms crossed. His blonde hair was cropped short, his eyes unreadable. Jax didn't need to hear his name to know who he was. Viktor had already warned him about Bo Langley, the team's captain, its best player, and the one most likely to push back. Langley smirked. "You gonna teach us how to fight, coach?" A couple of the other players chuckled, and Jax let the moment stretch, slow and deliberate. Then he took a step forward, his stare locking onto Langley's. "If I do my job right," Jax said, his voice even, "you won't need to." The smirk faltered, just slightly, and Jax knew he had already won the first battle. Victor blew the whistle again. "On the ice. Now." The players scrambled to obey, their skates scraping against the ice as they rushed to drills. Jax stepped back, arms crossed, watching. This was his proving ground. He had been given a second chance, but he knew better than anyone that second chances were worth nothing unless you earned them. As the players moved through their warm-ups, Jax's gaze flickered to the stands. A lone figure stood watching from the shadows, half hidden by the plexiglass. Victor must have noticed his distraction because he muttered, "She came to see if you'd show up." Jax exhaled sharply. Avery Shaw. She hadn't changed much. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, the same sharp intelligence in her eyes, though now there was something else there, something harder. Jax wasn't sure why she was here, but he had a feeling it wasn't just to welcome him back. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. Jax forced himself to focus. One battle at a time. For now, he had a team to fix. Chapter 3. The night air was sharp with the scent of snow and pine as Jax Kane stepped out of Ironwood Arena, his breath curling in the cold. The practice had been rough, predictably so. Some of the players had pushed back against his drills, others had gone through the motions with wary obedience, and a few, like Bo Langley, had made it clear that they weren't sure whether to challenge him or prove themselves. It didn't matter. Jax wasn't here to be liked. He was here to build something, and if that meant dragging the Lynx kicking and screaming into discipline, then so be it. His truck was covered in a light dusting of snow, and he brushed it off absent-mindedly. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the way Avery had watched from the stands. She hadn't stayed long, just long enough to let him know she was watching. Long enough to stir something inside him that he had tried to leave behind. The past wasn't done with him. He climbed into the truck, the leather seat cold beneath him, and pulled out onto the quiet streets of Lake Placid. The town had always been small, but at night, it felt even smaller. The roads were lined with warmly lit windows, the glow of diners and shops casting soft halos against the snow. He wasn't ready to head back to his rented cabin just yet. Instead, he pulled into the lot of Maggie's diner, the same place he had gone to after every game as a teenager, the same place where he had once made promises to a girl he hadn't been able to keep. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The place looked almost exactly the same: vinyl booths, wood-paneled walls, the scent of coffee and fried food hanging thick in the air. A few heads turned when he walked in, and the low murmur of conversation faltered. Jax ignored it and slid into a booth near the window. A waitress, one he didn't recognize, came over, her notepad in hand. "What can I get you?" "Coffee. Black." She nodded and disappeared behind the counter. Jax leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. His knuckles still ached from the cold, from the years of damage he had done to them. He flexed his fingers, watching as they curled into fists out of habit before forcing them to relax. From the other side of the diner, voices carried over in hushed tones. "I don't know why they'd bring him back. Guess they're desperate. Lynx haven't had a decent season in years. Desperate enough to hire a guy who got himself banned from the NHL?" Jax kept his expression neutral, his hands steady around the coffee cup as the waitress set it down in front of him. He didn't turn to see who was talking. He didn't need to. "I heard he took money to throw a game. That's why the league cut him." "Nah man. It was worse than that. Something about a fight that went too far. And now he's supposed to be a coach? Shit, I wouldn't let him near my kid." Jax let out a slow breath and took a sip of coffee. He had expected this. The past didn't stay buried in a town like this. The door swung open, and the low hum of conversation dimmed slightly as another figure stepped inside. Jax recognized him instantly. Dominic Voss. The man was well-dressed, his black wool coat neatly buttoned, his blonde hair slicked back with precision. He walked with the ease of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Jax had never liked him. Voss ran the Adirondack Falcons, the Lynx's biggest rival in the junior league. More than that, he had deep ties to the business side of hockey, the kind of connections that made things happen behind closed doors. He was the kind of man who played chess while everyone else thought they were in a fair game. And right now, he was walking straight toward Jax's booth. "Mind if I sit?" Voss didn't wait for an answer before sliding into the seat across from him. Jax set his coffee down. "If I say no, will it matter?" Voss grinned, but there was no warmth in it. Probably not. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension sat between them, thick and unspoken. Voss finally broke the silence. "I heard you're trying your hand at coaching. A noble effort, considering." Jax didn't bite. He just raised an eyebrow. "You hear a lot of things. It's my job to." Voss leaned back slightly, adjusting the cuffs of his coat. "The links are, let's say, in a transitional phase. The league's been watching, and frankly, some of us are wondering if bringing you in was the right move." Jax exhaled sharply. "Is that right?" "Come on, Kane." Voss smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A man like you? With your history? Do you really think you can stay clean?" Jax's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Voss?" The other man's smile widened. "I just came to offer a friendly piece of advice. The Junior League isn't the NHL, but it still has expectations. People invest a lot of money into these teams. They don't like surprises." "You mean they don't like losing control?" Voss shrugged. "Call it what you want. Just don't make the mistake of thinking you can rewrite your story, Kane. Some people don't get second chances." Jax stared at him, his pulse steady, his expression unreadable. "I guess we'll find out." Voss chuckled, a low, knowing sound. He slid out of the booth, adjusting his coat. "We will." As he walked toward the door, he paused briefly. "Oh, and say hello to Avery for me. We had a nice chat the other day." Jax's fingers clenched around his coffee cup. The bell jingled as Voss left the diner. Jax sat there for a long moment, the warmth of the coffee against his palm doing nothing to ease the cold that had settled deep in his chest. Voss was playing a game. And Jax had a feeling that Avery, whether she realized it or not, was already caught in the middle of it. Chapter 4. The cold had settled deep into Jax's bones by the time he pulled into the parking lot of the Lake Placid Community Center. The snow had started falling again, dusting the rooftops and sidewalks in a quiet, relentless rhythm. He killed the engine and sat in the truck for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as he took a deep breath. He hadn't planned on coming here tonight. Hell, he hadn't planned on much of anything since coming back. But after the encounter with Dominic Voss at the diner, the tension in his chest had refused to ease. He needed to clear his head, and this place, against all logic, had drawn him in. Through the frosted glass windows, the glow of warm light spilled onto the snow-covered ground. Inside, people milled about, some gathered near a makeshift stage, others clustered around tables where silent auction items were displayed. It was a fundraiser, probably for the rink or the Lynx program. Small-town hockey wasn't cheap, and the community had always done what it could to keep it alive. Jax pulled his coat tighter around him and stepped inside. The hum of conversation wrapped around him instantly, a mix of familiar and unfamiliar voices. He recognized some faces, parents of former teammates, old teachers, a few of the guys who had run the youth hockey leagues when he was a kid. But most of them just saw him as a stranger now, a man who had left and come back as someone they weren't sure they could trust. He was used to it. Jax made his way toward the back of the room, keeping his distance from the center of attention. A long table was lined with black and white photographs of past Lynx teams, each frame a frozen moment in time. His gaze moved over them, scanning faces he hadn't thought about in years. And then he saw her. Avery Shaw stood near the silent auction table, deep in conversation with a group of parents. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, strands escaping to frame her face. She wore a simple black sweater, her posture as poised as ever, but there was something different now. Something heavier in the way she carried herself. Jax had known he'd run into her eventually. Lake Placid was too small for anything else. But seeing her now, in the warm glow of the community center, hit harder than he expected. She hadn't seen him yet. For a second, he considered walking away, leaving before she noticed, before he had to confront whatever storm was brewing between them. But then, as if sensing him, She looked up. Their eyes met across the room. The air between them stretched tight, filled with years of unspoken words and old wounds that had never quite healed. Avery's expression didn't change at first. Her lips pressed together, her gaze sharp, but there was something beneath it, a flicker of something softer, something unsure. Jax swallowed hard. Don't be the first to look away. A beat passed. Then another. And then Avery turned back to the conversation in front of her, her body language shifting, closing off. Jax exhaled slowly. He had expected that. What he hadn't expected was the quiet voice beside him. You gonna stand there all night, or are you actually gonna say something to her? Jax turned his head to find Nina Torres, leaning against the wall with a knowing smirk. Christ, he muttered. You still sneak up on people like that? Nina shrugged. You've just gotten slower. Jax huffed out a laugh despite himself. Nina had been his neighbor growing up, the closest thing to a sister he'd ever had. She'd always been quick, always had an eye for things most people missed. It made sense that she'd ended up as a reporter. I didn't think you'd still be around, Jax said, studying her. Neither did I, Nina admitted. But turns out this town still has a lot of skeletons. And I happen to like digging them up. Jax didn't miss the pointed look she gave him. Yeah, he said. And what skeletons are you after now? Nina's expression sobered slightly. You for one. And whatever the hell Dominic Voss is doing wrapped around this team. Jax frowned. You think there's something there? I don't think, Nina said. I know. And you'd be smart to start paying attention. Before Jax could press for more, Nina's gaze flickered past him. And speaking of paying attention, she murmured. Jax turned just in time to see Avery heading toward the exit. Without thinking, he pushed away from the wall and followed. Outside, the cold hit harder than before, the snowfall heavier now. Avery had stopped near the edge of the parking lot, her arms crossed, her breath visible in the crisp air. Jax hesitated for half a second, then closed the distance. You always leave fundraisers early? Avery's shoulders stiffened at the sound of his voice, but she didn't turn right away. Only when they start feeling like déjà vu, she said. Jax huffed a quiet laugh, stepping closer. Didn't take you for the nostalgic type. Avery finally turned, and for the first time in a long time, he saw it, the look. The one that used to be reserved just for him, the one filled with fire and challenge and something deeper, something he had never been able to name. I'm not, she said. And I don't think you are either. Jax swallowed hard. Avery. No, she cut him off, her voice low but firm. You don't get to come back here and act like we can just pick up where we left off. That's not how this works. Jax clenched his jaw. I never said it was. Avery let out a slow breath, shaking her head. Then why are you here, Jax? There it was. The question he hadn't figured out how to answer yet. He could tell her the truth, that he was here because he had nowhere else to go, because hockey was the only thing he knew how to do, because for the first time in years, he wanted something to be different. But none of that mattered. Not to her. I'm here for the team, he said instead. That's it. Avery studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, before he could say anything else, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the falling snow. Jax stayed there a moment longer, his fists tightening at his sides. She didn't believe him. And maybe, just maybe, neither did he. Chapter 5. The arena was empty, its silence broken only by the occasional groan of the old heating system kicking in. Jax stood at center ice, hands in his pockets, watching as the overhead lights flickered faintly. The cold was different here, more personal. It had a way of creeping into your bones, settling deep in your chest, and refusing to let go. He exhaled, his breath visible in the air. His body still ached from yesterday's practice, but it wasn't the kind of ache that went away with rest. It was deeper than that. It was the weight of being back, of trying to carve out a place for himself in a town that had already decided who he was. He had told Avery he was here for the team. Now he just had to prove it. The sound of a door creaking open pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Bo Langley, the team's captain, stepping onto the ice, his skates whispering against the frozen surface. You're early, Jax noted. Langley shrugged, twirling his stick in his hands. Figured I'd get some extra ice time. That a problem? Jax smirked. Not if you're actually here to work. Langley met his gaze, something unreadable in his expression. You really think you can make us better? Jax crossed his arms. You tell me. Langley hesitated, then nodded toward the bench. That kid's been watching you all morning. Jax frowned and followed Langley's gaze toward the far end of the rink. There, half hidden in the shadows just beyond the boards, stood a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, bundled in a too-large jacket, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His face was partially obscured by a winter hat, but his eyes, wide and unblinking, were locked on Jax. Something about the intensity of the stare made Jax's stomach twist. Who is he? Jax asked. Langley shrugged. Dunno. He's been hanging around the last couple of weeks. Doesn't talk much. Just watches. Jax studied the boy for a moment longer, then skated toward the boards. The kid didn't move. You got a name? Jax asked. No answer. Jax crouched slightly, resting his arms on the top of the boards. You like hockey? A small nod. You play? A longer pause, then a tiny shake of the head. Jax frowned. Why not? The boy shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze darting away for the first time. His fingers clenched into fists inside his coat pockets. Jax sighed and leaned back. Well, that's a damn shame. You should try it sometime. The kid hesitated, then, so quietly that Jax almost didn't hear it, he murmured, I can't. Jax's frown deepened, but before he could press further, the arena doors swung open again, and a familiar voice cut through the silence. Luca. Jax turned just in time to see Avery Shaw stepping into the rink, her coat still dusted with fresh snow. The boy, Luca, immediately tensed, his small shoulders drawing inward. Avery's eyes locked onto Jax, sharp and guarded. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice low. Jax straightened, glancing between her and the boy. I should be asking you the same thing. Avery's lips pressed together. Come on, Luca. We have to go. Luca hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shuffled toward her. Jax watched, his pulse steady but his mind racing. He yours? Jax asked before he could stop himself. Avery's expression didn't change. That's none of your business. But the tightness in her voice, the flicker of something in her eyes, it was all the answer Jax needed. He didn't move as she turned and led the boy away, her grip on his hand firm but not forceful. Luca glanced back just once before disappearing through the doors. Jax let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. So that was it. That was the secret Avery had been keeping. The past had finally caught up to him. Chapter 6. Jax Kane didn't sleep that night. Not really. He spent hours sitting on the edge of his bed in the dim glow of a lamp, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. His thoughts churned, circling back to the same realization over and over again, refusing to settle. Luca. The boy's name rang in his head like an unanswered question. He had seen the truth in Avery's eyes, even if she hadn't said it outright. The sharp edge of panic when she'd found Luca at the rink. The way she had drawn him close, protective in a way that sent alarms ringing in Jax's gut. She had been hiding him. From him. Jax inhaled deeply, rubbing a hand over his face before shoving to his feet. He walked to the small kitchen of his rental cabin, filling a glass of water from the sink. The cabin was sparse, bare furniture, a bed that was too stiff, a couch he never used. It was temporary. It was supposed to be temporary. But now everything felt different. He took a slow sip of water and closed his eyes. Then, like the inevitable pull of a riptide, the past surged forward. 10 years ago. The roar of the Lake Placid Invitational crowd was deafening, but Jax barely heard it. His pulse thrummed in his ears, his skates carving into the ice as he set up the play. The puck flicked between his stick and Avery's, sharp, clean passes as they weaved through defenders. A flash of movement. Avery cut inside, drawing the goalie's attention for just a second too long. Jax didn't hesitate. Snap. The puck sailed past the goaltender's glove and hit the back of the net. The arena exploded. Jax grinned, breathless, as Avery crashed into him, arms wrapping around his neck. "You're a goddamn menace, Kane," she shouted over the noise. Jax laughed, gripping her waist to steady them both. The team swarmed them, piling on in celebration. They had done it, secured the game, punched their ticket to the finals. Later that night, after the town celebration had quieted, Jax and Avery found themselves sitting in the bed of his truck, parked at the edge of the lake. The ice stretched out before them, smooth and untouched, reflecting the glow of the moon. Avery hugged her knees to her chest, her breath visible in the cold air. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Jax leaned back on his elbows. "Yeah. The NHL. A house somewhere warm. Maybe a dog." She snorted. "You, in a house with a white picket fence?" He smirked. "Hey, I could do it. I'd just make it black." Avery shook her head, laughing softly. Then her smile faded. "But really, Jax, what if it doesn't go the way we think it will?" Jax turned his head toward her, frowning. "It will," she sighed. I don't want to be one of those people who peaks in high school, who looks back and realizes that was the best it was ever gonna be." Jax studied her in the moonlight, the way her dark eyes reflected something he didn't quite understand yet. "You won't be," he said. Avery looked at him then, really looked at him, and the space between them shifted. She leaned in first. Jax didn't stop her. The first kiss was slow, uncertain, but then she was gripping his jacket, pulling him closer, and Jax forgot about everything else, about the game, about the scouts, about the whole damn world beyond this moment. Jax jolted back to the present, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. His pulse was uneven, his breath ragged. That night. That was the last time things had been simple. Because after that, everything had unraveled. His NHL draft had come sooner than expected. He had left for training camp in a blur of adrenaline and promise, caught up in a whirlwind of press and contracts and expectations. Avery had been left behind. He had told himself he would come back, that he would make it work. But life had a way of getting in the way. By the time he had realized how much distance had grown between them, it had been too late. And now, Luca. The boy had to be 8. Which meant. Jax ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Christ. She had never told him. He had a son, and she had never told him. A new kind of anger curled in his gut, hot, sharp. Not just anger. Betrayal. Had she ever planned to tell him? Or had she decided a long time ago that he wasn't worth knowing? Jax clenched his jaw. Either way, it didn't matter now. He wasn't the same kid who had left town all those years ago. And if Avery thought she could keep this secret buried, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. Chapter 7. Avery Shaw stood at her kitchen counter, her fingers wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of tea she had no intention of drinking. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the rhythmic hum of the heater fighting against the bitter cold outside. Luca was upstairs, already asleep, his small frame buried under layers of blankets. He had barely spoken at dinner, which wasn't unusual, but tonight felt different. His silence had been weighted, thick with something he wasn't saying. She knew why. Jax had seen him. And worse, Jax had recognized him. Avery exhaled sharply and set her mug down, pressing the heels of her hands against the counter. Her heart was still hammering from the moment at the rink, from the way Jax had looked at her. That moment of realization in his eyes, sharp and cutting, had been impossible to miss. He knew. Or at the very least, he suspected. She had always known this day would come. She just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. A knock at the door made her jump. Her pulse spiked, but she schooled her expression before walking to the front door. Through the frosted glass, she could see the dark silhouette of a man standing outside. Not Jax. She unlatched the lock and pulled it open. Dominic Voss stood on her porch, his black wool coat perfectly pressed, his blonde hair untouched by the wind. Snowflakes dusted his shoulders, but he didn't seem to notice or care. His blue eyes flickered over her with the same calculating intensity he always carried, like a man who never wasted a move. "You're early," she said, her voice flat. Dominic offered a small smile. "And you seem surprised to see me." She stepped aside reluctantly, allowing him in. The warmth of the house enveloped him, but Dominic was the kind of man who never looked cold, no matter the temperature. He glanced around, his eyes briefly flicking toward the stairs before landing back on her. "Where is he?" he asked. Avery crossed her arms. "Asleep." Dominic nodded as if he approved of this. He walked further into the living room, studying the framed photos on the mantel. Most were of Luca, some of them taken when he was younger, back when Avery had first moved away from the city and started over in Lake Placid. "You don't have a single picture of yourself," Dominic mused. "Or of his father." Avery stiffened. "That's not an accident." Dominic turned to face her fully, the smile slipping from his lips. "Jax saw him today, didn't he?" Avery exhaled slowly, meeting his gaze. "He did. And nothing," she said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "Jax doesn't know anything for certain." Dominic studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "That's not going to last." Avery swallowed, her throat tight. She had spent years ensuring that Luca's life remained untouched by the storm that followed Jax Kane wherever he went. She had given up trying to hate Jax for leaving. She had accepted that he had chased his dreams the same way she had once chased hers. But this wasn't about her. This was about Luca. "You don't have to do this, Avery," Dominic said, his voice smooth, reassuring. "Luca is safe right now. With you. With me. We've made sure of that." Avery's nails dug into her palms. She had known Dominic for years. He had always been two things, powerful and patient. He didn't make idle threats, but he didn't make empty promises either. She had trusted him once. Now, she wasn't so sure. "Jax isn't a threat to Luca," she said, forcing steel into her voice. Dominic's lips curled at the corner. "Jax is a threat to everything you've built." Avery's stomach twisted. "He doesn't even know the truth yet." "But he will," Dominic said. "You know that as well as I do." The unspoken question hung between them. What happens when Jax finds out the truth? Avery didn't have an answer. Dominic took a slow step forward, lowering his voice. "You asked me for help once. I gave it to you. I made sure Luca had everything he needed. I made sure your past never touched him." Avery's throat tightened. "I can still protect you, Avery. But you have to let me." She knew what he meant. Dominic wasn't just offering protection. He was offering control. A way to keep Jax at a distance. A way to keep her secrets buried. But at what cost? She took a slow breath. "Luca is my son. Not yours." Dominic's jaw tensed, but he didn't lose his composure. He simply adjusted the cuff of his coat, his gaze cool. "I suggest you make a decision quickly," he said. "Before Jax makes it for you." And with that, he turned and walked to the door, leaving her standing there, heart pounding. The moment the door clicked shut, Avery let out a shaky breath. She pressed her hands against her temples, willing herself to think clearly. Jax was going to find out the truth. And when he did, everything would change. Chapter 8. Jax Kane didn't wait. He barely made it through the next practice before his frustration boiled over. His drills were sharper, his instructions short and clipped, his patience non-existent. The players noticed. Victor noticed. Even Nina, who had shown up to watch practice with her ever-present notebook, kept her distance. Jax didn't care. As soon as the last skater left the ice, he peeled off his gloves, tossed them onto the bench, and walked straight out of Ironwood Arena without a word. By the time he reached Avery's house, his pulse was steady, his hands clenched at his sides. He knew she wouldn't appreciate him showing up unannounced, but he didn't give a damn. She had lied to him. 4 years. He stood at her doorstep, the snow falling in a quiet, relentless rhythm, before knocking hard. A beat passed. Then another. When the door finally swung open, Avery stood there in leggings and an oversized sweater, her dark hair slightly damp, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Avery exhaled and stepped onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her. "Jax." "Don't," he interrupted, his voice rougher than he intended. "Not yet." Avery studied him, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I'm guessing this isn't a social visit." Jax let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You think?" Avery sighed. "Lower your voice." Luca's sleeping. Jax flinched at the name, at the casual way it left her lips. Luca, he repeated, the word unfamiliar in his mouth. He shook his head, stepping back slightly. Jesus Christ, Avery. How long were you going to keep this from me? Avery's jaw tightened. This isn't. 8 years, Jax cut in, his voice like gravel. 8 goddamn years, Avery. And I'm just supposed to accept that you didn't think I deserved to know. She flinched at that, but she didn't look away. It wasn't that simple, she said. Jax let out a sharp breath, his fingers flexing at his sides. Then explain it to me, because right now, all I see is the fact that you made a decision that should have been ours, but you never even gave me the chance. Avery's shoulders stiffened. A decision, she echoed, her voice colder now. You mean like the decision you made when you left? Jax went still. Avery stepped closer, her eyes burning. You went after your dream, Jax. And I never stood in your way. But you didn't come back. You didn't call. You didn't ask if there was anything here worth staying for. Jax's pulse pounded. I was 18, Avery. I didn't know. He dragged a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. I didn't know you were pregnant. Avery swallowed, her throat working. And by the time I did, it was too late. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Jax tried to breathe through the anger, through the ache in his chest that he wasn't ready to name. I had a right to know, he said finally, his voice quieter now. Avery's arms wrapped around herself, her gaze flickering, something raw bleeding through. Maybe you did, she admitted. But I had to do what was best for Luca. And at the time, that wasn't you. Jax flinched like she had struck him. Avery's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to take it back, but she didn't. Jax exhaled, stepping back again, shaking his head. You don't get to decide that. I did what I had to, Avery said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jax stared at her, his pulse hammering, his jaw tight enough to ache. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that she had kept Luca from him, or the fact that deep down, a part of him understood why. Finally, he swallowed and turned toward his truck. This isn't over, Avery, he said, his voice rough. And then he walked away, leaving her standing on the porch, watching as the past caught up to both of them. Chapter 9. The cold night air did nothing to settle the storm raging inside Jax Kane as he drove. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight, his knuckles white. His mind was running too fast, looping through everything Avery had said, everything she hadn't said, and the one undeniable truth that changed everything. He had a son. For 8 years, Avery had kept him in the dark. He should have been angrier. Maybe he was angry. He wasn't even sure anymore. But beneath the sharp edge of betrayal, beneath the ache in his chest, was something else. Something deeper. He had a son. And he knew nothing about him. Jax forced himself to breathe, rolling his shoulders as he turned off the main road and pulled into a driveway he hadn't seen in years. The small house was tucked away behind a cluster of trees, the porch light flickering slightly against the night. He killed the engine and stepped out, crunching through the snow toward the front door. He barely lifted his hand to knock before the door swung open. Nina Torres stood there, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. Took you long enough, she muttered, stepping aside to let him in. Jax exhaled, running a hand through his hair as he stepped into the warmth of her living room. You knew, he said, his voice rough. Nina didn't bother pretending she didn't understand. She shut the door, locking it behind her, then turned to face him fully. I had my suspicions, she admitted. But I didn't know for sure. Not until tonight. Jax let out a sharp breath, pacing toward the fireplace, his hands on his hips. 8 goddamn years, Nina. He turned back to her. How the hell did no one say anything? How did no one tell me? Nina leaned against the arm of the couch, watching him carefully. You really want that answer? Jax clenched his jaw. Yeah. I do. She exhaled. Because Avery didn't want you to know. His stomach twisted, even though he already knew that. Nina continued. You were gone, Jax. NHL, fights, headlines. By the time Luca was born, you weren't just that kid from Lake Placid anymore. You were Razor Kane, the guy throwing punches every night, the guy making a name for himself as one of the most feared enforcers in the league. Jax swallowed hard. She thought she was protecting him, Nina said. From that life. From you. Jax exhaled sharply and sank onto the couch, resting his elbows on his knees. He dragged his hands down his face, his pulse heavy in his ears. That life is over, he muttered. Yeah? You sure about that? Nina shot back. Because I just watched you nearly throw Bo Langley through the boards at practice today. Jax looked up, his jaw tightening. I'm not the same guy I was back then, Nina. She studied him for a moment, then sighed and sat across from him. I believe you, she said. But Avery? She doesn't know that. All she knows is who you were when you left. And Dominic Voss? He's been feeding into that fear for years. Jax's head snapped up. What does Voss have to do with this? Nina's expression darkened. More than you realize. She grabbed a stack of papers from the coffee table and tossed them in front of him. Jax frowned and picked them up. Bank records. Transactions. Payments. All linked to Voss Enterprises. His stomach clenched. He's been funding Avery? Jax asked, flipping through the pages. Not exactly, Nina said. He's been funding Luca. Sponsorships. Scholarships. Donations. Whatever you want to call it, Voss has had his hands in their lives for a long time. Jax's grip tightened on the papers. Why? That's the million-dollar question, Nina muttered. But I think I'm getting close to the answer. And I think you're right in the middle of it. Jax exhaled slowly, staring at the documents in front of him. This wasn't just about Avery keeping Luca a secret. This was bigger. And if Voss was involved, Jax had a feeling things were about to get a hell of a lot worse. Chapter 10. The emergency room was bright, sterile, and filled with the low hum of beeping machines and hushed voices. The scent of antiseptic clung to the air, sharp and clinical, a stark contrast to the raw, chaotic energy Jax had carried in with him. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his jaw tight as he watched the medical team work on Dylan Mercer, one of the Lynx's defensemen. The kid had taken a brutal hit during the game earlier that evening, one that hadn't looked accidental. Jax had seen plenty of bad hits in his career. He'd delivered more than his fair share. But this one had been different. It had been targeted. A deliberate elbow to the head, followed by an unnatural collapse to the ice. Dylan hadn't moved for several seconds, his body limp. The moment it had happened, Jax had shoved his way onto the ice, fists clenched, barely holding himself back. But it hadn't been the time for violence. Not yet. Now, watching from the hallway outside the ER, his fingers twitched at his sides. He's stable, a voice said. Jax turned to see Avery standing beside him, still in her scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes held the weight of the night's events. A concussion? Jax asked. Avery nodded. A bad one. He's lucky it wasn't worse. Jax exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. That hit wasn't clean, Avery murmured. No shit, Jax muttered, his jaw clenching. Avery studied him for a moment. You think it was intentional? Jax didn't answer right away. Instead, he let his gaze drift toward the doorway where Dylan lay unconscious, and four in his arm. The memory of the hit replayed in his mind, over and over. I don't think, Jax said. I know. Avery's lips pressed together, her arms crossing. That's a serious accusation. Jax let out a bitter chuckle. I don't care about accusations. I care about what I saw. That kid didn't just get knocked around. He was targeted. Avery hesitated, her fingers tightening against her arms. Jax, you can't. What? Jax turned to her, his voice edged with frustration. I can't call it what it is. I can't say out loud that the league is rigged with bullshit politics and dirty plays. Avery sighed, rubbing her temple. I'm saying be careful. You already have a reputation. If you start making noise about game fixing and intentional hits, people are going to assume you're just looking for a fight. Jax let out a slow breath, forcing himself to loosen his fists. He knew she was right. But that didn't mean he could let this go. He's 17, Avery, Jax said quietly. And someone tried to take him out tonight like he was a pawn in a bigger game. Avery's expression softened slightly. I'll keep an eye on him, she said. Make sure he recovers properly. Jax nodded, dragging a hand through his hair. He was about to say something else when the door to the ER swung open, and Dominic Voss strode in like he owned the damn place. Jax stiffened instantly. Voss was dressed in his usual pristine suit, his expression smooth, unreadable. His eyes flicked between Jax and Avery before settling on Jax with an almost amused glint. "Kane," he greeted, voice dripping with insincere warmth. Jax's jaw ticked. "Voss." Avery, standing between them, looked instantly uneasy. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Voss smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips. "Checking on one of my prospects, of course. I have a vested interest in the health of the young talent in this league." Jax let out a sharp laugh. "That's funny, considering one of your guys just tried to take Dylan's head off tonight." Voss tilted his head, feigning innocence. "That's quite the accusation, Kane." Jax stepped forward, the heat rising under his skin. "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." Voss chuckled, shaking his head. "You're still the same, aren't you? Always looking for a fight. Always seeing conspiracies where there aren't any." Jax's fingers twitched, and for a second, he wanted nothing more than to drive his fist into Voss's smug face. But he forced himself to stay still, to breathe. Voss leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough that only Jax could hear. "You should be careful, Kane," he murmured. "You've only just come back. Would be a shame if you got yourself benched permanently." Jax's muscles coiled tight. Before he could react, Avery stepped in, placing a firm hand on his chest, stopping him. "Not here," she murmured. Jax's pulse pounded, but he exhaled sharply, forcing himself to take a step back. Voss smirked, clearly satisfied with himself. He adjusted the cuffs of his jacket. "Good talk." Then, with a nod toward Avery, he added, "I'll be seeing you soon." With that, he turned and walked out. Jax watched him go, his blood still thrumming with the urge to knock him flat. "He's playing a game," Avery said quietly. Jax let out a slow breath. "Yeah. And I'm done playing by his rules." Avery studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then be smart about it, Jax. Because it's only the beginning." Jax clenched his jaw. He knew she was right. But one thing was certain. If Voss wanted a war, he was damn sure going to get one. Chapter 11. Jax Kane was supposed to be focusing on practice. Instead, his eyes kept drifting to the edge of the rink, where a small, quiet figure stood half-hidden behind the plexiglass. The kid, Luca, was watching again. It wasn't the first time. Jax had noticed him before, lingering near the stands or tucked away in the shadows of the arena, his small hands gripping the metal railing as he stared at the ice with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The boy never spoke, never cheered, never reacted. He just watched. And now that Jax knew who he was, that silent, piercing gaze felt like a weight pressing against his chest. He tried to shake it off, turning back to the ice. "Focus, Kane." The Lynx were running through drills, their skates carving sharp lines into the fresh sheet of ice. Jax skated alongside them, shouting instructions, pushing them harder, demanding more. The energy in the rink was different today, faster, sharper. The last game had rattled them, and they were finally starting to understand that Jax wasn't here to babysit. He was here to build something. "Langley, keep your damn stick down." Jax barked as the team captain fumbled a pass. Langley shot him a glare but adjusted. The next play was smoother. Jax nodded. "Good." But as the drill continued, his eyes kept flickering back toward the stands. Luca was still there. And for the first time, Jax let himself really look at him. The kid was small for his age, with a frame that hinted he might grow taller in time. His dark hair peeked out from beneath a wool hat, and even from a distance, Jax could see the way his fingers twitched slightly, as if he was itching to be out on the ice instead of watching from behind the glass. Then there were his eyes. Sharp. Observant. Too damn familiar. Jax clenched his jaw and forced himself to focus on the practice, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave him. After an hour of drills, Victor blew the whistle, signaling the end of practice. The players skated off, breathing hard, peeling off helmets and gloves as they muttered amongst themselves. Jax watched them go, then turned his attention back to the stands. Luka was gone. Jax frowned, scanning the empty bleachers. The arena doors were still swinging slightly, as if someone had just slipped through them. Without thinking, Jax stepped off the ice and headed toward the exit. Outside, the cold air hit him hard. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, coating the pavement in a thin layer of white. And then, a small figure stood near the parking lot, kicking at the ice with the toe of his boot. Luka. Jax hesitated. Then, cautiously, he stepped forward. Hey. Luka didn't look up. Jax cleared his throat. You like watching practice? A small nod. Jax stuffed his hands into his coat pockets. Ever skated before? Another pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, Luka shook his head. Jax frowned. No. Silence. Jax crouched slightly to be at eye level with him. You want to? Luka's fingers curled into the hem of his coat. His gaze flickered toward Jax, just for a second. Then he whispered, I can't. Jax's stomach twisted. Why not? Luka didn't answer. Before Jax could press, the sound of hurried footsteps interrupted them. Avery. Her coat was barely buttoned, her breath visible in the cold air as she approached. Her eyes locked onto Luka first, relief flashing across her face, then shifted to Jax, guarded, sharp. Luka, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. Come inside. Luka hesitated for only a second before walking to her side, his small hand slipping into hers. Jax straightened, his chest tight. Avery met his gaze. There were 1,000 things she wasn't saying. And just as many things Jax wanted to say. But in the end, neither of them spoke. Avery turned, leading Luka away. Jax watched them go, his fists clenching at his sides. He had spent years fighting battles on the ice. But something told him this was going to be the hardest fight of his life. Chapter 12. Jax Kane knew when a game was being played. And tonight, it wasn't just on the ice. The energy in Ironwood Arena was electric, the stands packed for the Lynx's game against the Saranac Thunderbirds. The rivalry between the two teams had always been intense, but there was something different about tonight. The air felt thick, charged, as if everyone was waiting for something to explode. Jax stood behind the bench, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the ice as the first period began. The Lynx were playing hard, faster, more aggressive, but something was off. The penalties started almost immediately. First, a hooking call on Langley. Then a tripping call on Reese Taylor, one that hadn't even touched the opponent. Then a 5-minute major on Drew Callahan for what should have been a routine body check. Jax clenched his jaw as the referee skated over to the scorekeeper's box, barely looking at him. That's 3 bullshit calls in 10 minutes, Jax growled. Victor, standing beside him, let out a low hum. You noticing it too? Jax exhaled sharply. They're trying to cripple us. On the ice, the Lynx were down 2 men, trying desperately to hold the Thunderbirds off. Jax's stomach tightened as he caught a glimpse of Dominic Voss sitting high in the stands, arms folded, watching the game unfold like a king surveying his kingdom. Jax's fingers curled into fists. This isn't a game, he muttered under his breath. This is a setup. Victor nodded. So what do we do? Jax's eyes flickered to his players, his gut churning. We fight back. The second period started just as dirty as the first. Langley took an elbow to the head that the refs ignored. Callahan was slashed across the hands. Ignored. Then, as if to make things even more obvious, the Thunderbirds got their 4th power play after a soft interference call that wouldn't have been whistled in a peewee game. Jax had had enough. He stepped up onto the bench, leaning forward. Ref. His voice cut through the noise of the arena. The official skated by, deliberately not making eye contact. Don't pretend you don't hear me. Jax snapped. You calling the same game I'm watching? Because if you are, you're either blind or paid off. The ref finally turned, his expression tight. Watch it, Kane. Jax let out a sharp laugh, stepping closer. Or what? You gonna toss me too? Might as well, you're already throwing this game. A whistle blew. Bench minor, unsportsmanlike conduct. The crowd erupted in boos, but Jax didn't flinch. He didn't even react. Instead, he smiled. Because now, he was sure. This wasn't just bad officiating. It was intentional. And there was only one person in this league with enough power to make that happen. Dominic Voss. The game ended in a 4-2 loss. The moment the final buzzer sounded, Jax stormed off the bench, his pulse pounding in his ears. He didn't even acknowledge the reporters waiting near the tunnel. He had only one target in mind. Voss. The man was still sitting in the stands, watching with a smirk, as if he had known exactly how this was going to play out before the first puck had even dropped. Jax pushed through the crowd, ignoring the murmurs, the cameras flashing in his peripheral vision. He reached the base of the stands just as Voss stood, adjusting the cuffs of his coat with practiced ease. "Enjoy the game?" Voss asked smoothly, his expression calm. Jax's fists curled. "You rigged it." Voss tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering across his face. "That's a very strong accusation." Jax stepped closer. "You're pulling the strings behind the scenes, feeding the refs, making sure your team wins. What's the endgame, Voss? Trying to run me out of the league?" Voss exhaled as if bored. "Oh, Jax. Always so quick to assume the world is against you." Jax clenched his jaw. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about these kids. You're screwing with their futures. Rigging games, stacking the deck, using them." Voss's smirk widened. "You think I'm the only one?" Jax frowned. "Hockey isn't a fairy tale, Kane. It never has been," Voss said, his tone almost pitying. "There are deals happening at every level. You just never paid attention before." Jax's stomach churned. "You want to take me down?" he asked. "Try it. But don't use them." Voss chuckled, brushing imaginary dust off his coat. "You're emotional. That's always been your weakness." Jax inhaled sharply, his muscles tight, his blood thrumming with the urge to hit something. Voss leaned in slightly. "You don't belong here, Kane. This isn't your world anymore." Jax's pulse pounded. "We'll see about that," he said. Then he turned and walked away. Because this wasn't just about a bad game. This was war. Chapter 13. Jax Kane sat alone in the dimly lit confines of Ironwood Arena, long after the players had left, after the lights had dimmed, and the cold had fully settled into his bones. The echo of skates on ice and the sharp blast of the final whistle still rang in his ears, but it wasn't just tonight's game haunting him. It was everything. Voss. The rigged game. Luca. And the past he had spent years trying to outrun. Jax exhaled slowly and leaned forward on the bench, staring out at the empty rink. His body was sore, his fists still itching with the impulse he had barely restrained after the game. He had always been a fighter, but this wasn't the NHL. Here, if he lost control, he wouldn't just be throwing away his own career. He'd be screwing over the kids he was supposed to be leading. He ran a hand over his face. Victor's voice interrupted the silence. "Thought you'd be gone by now." Jax didn't turn. "Yeah, well. Couldn't sleep." Victor walked toward him slowly, his cane tapping against the floor. When he finally sat down beside Jax, he let out a quiet grunt, stretching out his aching legs. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "It's happening again, isn't it?" Jax finally muttered. Victor nodded once. "Yeah, it is." Jax clenched his jaw. The game tonight wasn't just bad officiating. It was a play, a move in a larger game. And if Voss was behind it, that meant this wasn't the last time it would happen. "I don't know how deep it goes," Jax admitted. Victor let out a slow breath. "Deep enough." Jax turned his head. "You knew." Victor didn't deny it. "I had suspicions," he said. "But suspicions don't mean much in a town like this. Not unless you have proof. And proof has a habit of disappearing when Voss is involved." Jax exhaled sharply. "This isn't the first time," Victor added. Jax stiffened. Victor stared at the ice, his weathered face unreadable. "Back when you were still in the NHL, before everything happened, there were whispers about junior leagues. Money changing hands. Game fixing. Prospects getting fast-tracked not because of talent, but because of who their families owed favors to." Jax frowned. "And Voss?" he asked. Victor nodded. "Always in the middle of it." Jax gritted his teeth. So why hasn't anyone taken him down? Victor let out a dry chuckle. Because no one's willing to take that fight. Not when there's too much to lose. Jax let the words settle, the weight of them pressing against his ribs. Too much to lose. The past had already taken everything from him once. His career. His reputation. And now? Now he had something else at stake. Luca. The thought sent a sharp, unfamiliar ache through him. This isn't just about the links, is it? Jax murmured. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he turned his head, studying Jax with those sharp, knowing eyes. No, he said. It's not. Jax inhaled deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. If I go after him, Jax muttered, if I dig into this, I need to know, are you in? Victor exhaled, his gaze steady. I was never out, kid. Jax nodded, his jaw tightening. Because now? Now, he wasn't just playing defense. He was going on the attack. Chapter 14. The wind howled through the streets of Lake Placid, carrying the bitter bite of fresh snow as Jax Kane stood outside Nina Torres's small house. His breath fogged in the cold, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. He hadn't planned on coming here tonight. Not really. But after everything that had happened at the arena, after watching Dylan Mercer get taken out with a hit that should have never happened, after staring into Dominic Voss's smug, untouchable face, he needed answers. And if anyone had them, it was Nina. Jax knocked harder than necessary, his pulse still running too hot from the game, from the fight he had barely held back. He expected a delay, maybe some muttered curse from the other side of the door. Instead, the lock clicked almost immediately, and the door swung open. Nina stood there, her dark eyes sharp as they scanned his face. Took you long enough. Jax exhaled and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The heat from the apartment was a stark contrast to the brutal cold outside. It smelled like coffee and ink, the same way he remembered from years ago, back when Nina was still just the neighborhood kid who always had a notebook and too many questions. The place was cluttered, but in an organized chaos kind of way. Papers covered the dining table, a laptop sat open with a half-written article glowing on the screen, and stacks of manila folders were arranged in a way that only made sense to Nina. She closed the door behind him and crossed her arms. You gonna tell me why you look like you want to put someone through a wall? Jax clenched his jaw. Voss. Nina sighed like she had been expecting that. She ran a hand through her curly hair, then gestured to the table. Sit down, Kane. You're gonna want to see this. Jax didn't argue. He pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the wooden floor as he sat. Nina grabbed a thick folder from the pile and slid it toward him. Everything I've got on him so far. Jax flipped it open. It didn't take long for his gut to tighten. Financial records. Sponsorship deals. Player transfers. Transactions between shell companies. Companies that, at first glance, had nothing to do with hockey but, on closer inspection, all funneled back to Voss Enterprises. Jax exhaled sharply. This isn't just about the links, he muttered, his fingers tightening around the edge of the pages. Nina nodded. No. It's bigger. She tapped the papers in front of him. Junior teams. AHL affiliates. Even some NHL scouts. Voss has been buying control, deciding which kids make it and which ones don't. Jax clenched his jaw. And if someone doesn't play along? Nina's expression darkened. They get buried. Jax inhaled through his nose, trying to keep his pulse steady. So Dylan's hit. Wasn't an accident, Nina finished. She pulled out another sheet of paper and laid it in front of him. It was a bank statement. Jax scanned the name on it. His stomach dropped. The kid who had taken out Dylan, the Saranac Thunderbirds defenseman, his family had received a large payment last year. From one of Voss's shell companies. Son of a bitch, Jax muttered. Nina leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. He's stacking the deck, Kane. And he's doing it in plain sight because no one has the balls to stop him. Jax's fingers curled into fists. His entire body was tight with the kind of anger that felt impossible to contain. He's using these kids, he said, his voice low. Messing with their futures like they're nothing. Nina exhaled. Yeah. And if you keep pushing? He's gonna come for you too. Jax's eyes snapped up. Let him. Nina shook her head. I'm serious, Jax. You think Voss hasn't already planned for this? He's probably counting on you losing your temper, doing something stupid. That's what he does. He lets you bury yourself. Jax gritted his teeth. Then what do we do? Nina studied him for a moment. Then she reached into another folder and pulled out a USB drive. We build a case. Jax frowned. What's on that? Audio recordings. Financial trails. Names. She slid it across the table. It's not enough to take him down yet, but it's enough to make him nervous. Jax picked up the drive, turning it between his fingers. So we make him sweat. Nina nodded. And while he's sweating, we get the rest of what we need. Jax exhaled, his grip tightening around the drive. For the first time since coming back to Lake Placid, he finally felt clear. This wasn't just about his past anymore. It was about the future. For Dylan. For the Lynx. For Luca. And Jax wasn't going to stop until Voss's empire burned to the ground. The drive back to his cabin was quieter than it should have been. The roads were empty, snow falling in thick waves, his headlights cutting through the darkness. Jax's mind wasn't on the road. It was on the fight ahead. And on Avery. She had been avoiding him since their confrontation. Since he had found out about Luca. But that was about to change. Because if she thought she could keep him at arm's length while Voss was circling, she was wrong. Jax clenched the steering wheel. Tomorrow, he was going to see her. And this time, she wasn't going to walk away. Chapter 15. Jax Kane had seen plenty of cheap shots in his time. On the ice, they came in the form of a blindside hit, a knee-on-knee collision, a sneaky slash to the wrist when the ref wasn't looking. Off the ice, they came in the form of headlines. And this morning, his name was plastered across every single one of them. Jax sat on the edge of his bed, the cold air in his cabin doing nothing to cool the slow burn in his chest. His phone screen glowed with the damage, article after article, all spinning the same damn story. Jax Kane's return, redemption or disaster? NHL's former enforcer brings trouble to junior hockey. Coach or criminal? Inside Jax Kane's checkered pass, Jax exhaled slowly through his nose. He knew who was behind this. Dominic Voss. The bastard hadn't wasted any time. Jax had barely started digging into his corruption, barely started making waves, and already Voss was pulling his strings in the media. And the worst part? He had help. Skylar Rhodes. Jax tapped open one of the articles. Right at the top, written in Skylar's signature sharp, biting style, was an editorial tearing him apart. She had been a reporter once, a damn good one. Back when she still had a shred of integrity. But these days, she was nothing more than Voss's mouthpiece. Jax shouldn't have been surprised. She had always been good at one thing, spinning a story. And now, she was spinning one about him. 30 minutes later, Jax was standing outside Nina Torres's office, his jaw tight as he knocked hard against the glass door. Nina opened it with a look that told him she had already seen the headlines. "I assume you're here because of the circus," she muttered, stepping aside. Jax walked in, barely glancing at the cluttered desk or the stacks of notes scattered around. "Voss is coming at me hard," he said. "And he's using Skylar to do it." Nina nodded, crossing her arms. "I saw." She didn't hold back. Jax clenched his fists. "She never does." Nina sat on the edge of her desk. "You want to know the real problem?" Jax gave her a sharp look. "Oh, do tell." Nina sighed. "It's working." Jax's stomach twisted. "Sponsors are backing out," she continued. "Parents are getting nervous. There's even talk that the league might start reevaluating whether you should be coaching the Lynx at all." Jax gritted his teeth. "So that's the play," he muttered. "Voss couldn't shake me on the ice, so now he's trying to bury me off it." Nina shrugged. "It's not a bad strategy. You've got a history. A reputation. He's just dusting it off and making sure the right people remember it." Jax exhaled sharply, pacing toward the window. Outside, the town was waking up, people walking through the snow-covered streets, oblivious to the war brewing just beneath the surface. "So what do I do?" he asked. "You fight back." Jax turned to Nina. "How?" She smirked, reaching for a USB drive on her desk. By giving them a bigger story. An hour later, Jax pulled into the Lake Placid Medical Center. If Voss wanted to play dirty, Jax was more than ready to drag him into the light. And the first step? Dylan Mercer. Jax strode through the halls, his boots heavy against the tile floor. When he reached Dylan's room, he knocked once before pushing the door open. Dylan looked up from his hospital bed, his face still pale from the concussion he'd suffered in the last game. His parents sat beside him, their expressions wary as Jax stepped inside. "How are you feeling?" Jax asked, keeping his voice steady. Dylan shrugged. "Like I got hit by a truck." Jax exhaled. "You don't remember the hit, do you?" Dylan shook his head. "Not really. Just flashes." Jax nodded. "That's what I thought." He turned to Dylan's parents. "I need you to listen to me carefully." They exchanged glances but didn't interrupt. "That hit wasn't an accident," Jax said, his tone sharp. "It was a setup. And I have proof." Dylan's father sat forward, his expression darkening. "What kind of proof?" Jax pulled out his phone and played the recording Nina had found, a conversation between a Thunderbirds assistant coach and a mystery benefactor. "Take Kane down. His team, his players. Get inside their heads. Make him snap. You know what to do." Jax watched as Dylan's parents stiffened, their eyes widening. "Voss is behind this," Jax continued. "He's using these kids as pawns. Paying off refs, stacking rosters, deciding who makes it and who doesn't. And if you think Dylan is the first one to get targeted, you're wrong." Dylan's mother swallowed hard. "What are you asking us to do?" she whispered. Jax met their gazes evenly. "Go public," he said. "Tell the league. The media. Make noise. If enough people start asking questions, even Voss won't be able to bury this." Dylan's father exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. Then he nodded. "We're in." Jax nodded back, his fists unclenching slightly. One battle won. But the war? It was just getting started. By the time Jax walked out of the hospital, the snow had picked up, swirling in thick, blinding waves. He reached his truck, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The line rang twice. Then, Skylar Rhodes's voice filled his ear. "Well, well," she purred. "If it isn't Jax Kane." Jax's grip tightened on the phone. "You and I need to talk," he said. Skylar chuckled. "Do we?" "Cut the bullshit," Jax snapped. "You're writing for Voss. You're helping him bury me. So tell me, what's the price? How much is he paying you?" A pause. Then, softly, "Not everything is about money, Kane." Jax frowned. There was something off about her tone, something he couldn't quite place. "Then what is it?" he demanded. Another silence. Then, finally, "Meet me tomorrow," Skylar said. "Midnight. The old train yard." Jax hesitated. "Why there?" "Because," she murmured, "you're not the only one who wants Voss gone." And then the line went dead. Jax stared at his phone, his pulse pounding. Skylar wasn't just working for Voss. She was hiding something. And whatever it was, it might be the key to bringing the bastard down for good. Chapter 16. The wind howled through the abandoned Lake Placid train yard, kicking up snow in sharp, swirling gusts as Jax Kane pulled his truck into the lot. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating rusted tracks, forgotten railcars, and the skeletal remains of an old maintenance station. It was the perfect place for a meeting that wasn't supposed to happen. Jax killed the engine and checked his phone. 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes early. His instincts screamed that this was a bad idea. That Skylar Rhodes, Voss's personal spin doctor, wasn't someone to be trusted. But she was the one who had called this meeting, and if there was even a chance she had information that could take Voss down, he had to take it. A single pair of headlights appeared in the distance. Jax leaned against his truck, watching as the sleek black sedan pulled to a stop a few feet away. The engine idled for a moment before the driver's door opened, and Skylar stepped out, her heels crunching against the frozen gravel. She was wrapped in a long black coat, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her expression unreadable. "You're late," Jax muttered. Skylar smirked, pulling a cigarette from her coat pocket. And you're still as dramatic as ever. Jax crossed his arms. Cut the crap, Skylar. You called me. She exhaled slowly, a thin plume of smoke curling into the air. I did. Why? Skylar's gaze flickered toward the empty lot behind them before landing back on him. Because I'm tired of playing for the losing side. Jax frowned. Last I checked, Voss was winning. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You really think that? You think a man like Voss sleeps easy at night? He's desperate, Jax. You put your hands in too many pockets, and eventually, you run out of places to hide. Jax narrowed his eyes. What are you saying? Skylar flicked her cigarette away and pulled a flash drive from her coat. I'm saying I have proof. Jax's pulse kicked up. Proof of what? Skylar stepped closer, pressing the drive into his palm. Financial records. Wire transfers. Bribery payments. A direct link between Voss and the refs from your last game. Her voice dropped lower. And that's just the beginning. Jax tightened his grip around the drive. Why now? He asked. Why turn on him? Skylar hesitated. Because I know what happens to people who get in his way, she said quietly. And I'm not gonna be one of them. Jax studied her for a long moment. He could hear the slight tremor in her voice, the tightness in her posture. She was scared. And Skylar Rhodes never got scared. What's he planning? Jax asked. Skylar exhaled. Something big. Something that doesn't just end with rigged games. She met his eyes. You don't have much time, Jax. If you're going to take him down, it has to be soon. Jax clenched his jaw, nodding. Skylar took a step back. Be careful, Kane. Then she turned, climbed back into her car, and peeled away into the darkness. Jax stood there for a long moment, staring down at the drive in his hand. This was it. The first real weapon he had against Voss. And he was damn sure going to use it. The next morning, Jax walked into Avery Shaw's office at the Lake Placid Medical Center. She was sitting behind her desk, flipping through a patient chart, but the moment she looked up and saw him, her expression hardened. What do you want, Jax? Jax tossed the flash drive onto her desk. I need your help. Avery stared at the drive, then at him. With what? Voss. Jax ran a hand through his hair. I have proof. Real proof. Financial trails, bribery records. Everything we need to take him down. Avery folded her arms. And you're telling me this because? Jax exhaled. Because you're the only person in this town people actually trust. Avery's lips parted slightly, caught off guard. Jax leaned forward. I know I screwed up before. I know I don't have the cleanest reputation. But this isn't just about me, Avery. This is about Luca. About the Lynx. About every kid in this league getting played like a damn pawn in Voss's game. Avery hesitated. Jax saw it, the flicker of conflict in her eyes, the part of her that wanted to believe him, even if she was still holding back. What do you need me to do? She asked finally. Jax exhaled. Help me get this out. If I go public alone, Voss will bury it. But if you're involved? If the medical board, if parents start asking questions? It won't just be me anymore. Avery studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached for the drive. Okay. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. This was it. The beginning of the end for Dominic Voss. And he damn well wasn't going to lose this fight. Chapter 17. The Ironwood Arena was packed, the stands pulsing with energy as the Lynx faced off against the Adirondack Falcons. The crowd was loud, but Jax Kane barely heard them. His focus was razor-sharp, his stance rigid behind the bench as he watched his players battle on the ice. This wasn't just a game. This was a statement. After the last match, the rigged penalties, the brutal hit on Dylan Mercer, the blatant corruption, Jax had made damn sure his team was ready. They played harder, cleaner, proving to the refs, to the league, to everyone watching that they didn't need to cheat to win. And yet, with 5 minutes left in the third period, the Lynx were down by 1 goal. Jax's jaw clenched. His players were exhausted, their shifts getting shorter, their legs burning from the relentless pace. But they weren't quitting. Neither was he. One more push, he called out. Dig deep. Langley, his captain, skated by, giving a sharp nod. Jax exhaled, his pulse thrumming. Then, just as the ref dropped the puck for the next face-off, a shriek cut through the air. Jax's head snapped toward the stands. A commotion had erupted near the tunnel leading to the exit. People were standing, shouting. Security guards were pushing through the crowd. A cold wave of dread crashed through Jax's chest. He stepped off the bench, barely registering Victor's voice behind him. Something was wrong. Then he heard the words that stopped his heart cold. Luca. Where's Luca? Jax turned so fast he almost lost his footing. Avery was pushing through the crowd, her face pale, frantic, her eyes wild with panic. Jax's blood turned to ice. Luca. He bolted toward her, shoving through people, his heart pounding in his ears. Avery. He reached her in seconds, gripping her arms. What happened? Her breathing was ragged, her hands shaking. I don't know. He was right next to me, and then, he was just gone. Jax's vision blurred with rage and fear. Security, he barked, spinning toward the nearest guard. Lock down the arena. No one leaves until we find him. The guard hesitated. Sir, we can't just... Jax got in his face, his voice deadly quiet. Do it. Now. The man radioed in orders immediately. Jax turned back to Avery, gripping her shoulders. Think, Avery. Where would he go? Her breath hitched. He loves hockey, she whispered. He wouldn't just leave. Jax's mind raced. Then it hit him. The locker rooms. Without a word, he took off running. The hallway leading to the locker rooms was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of sweat and ice. Jax's boots pounded against the concrete floor as he sprinted past rows of equipment and lockers, his heart slamming against his ribs. Luca, his voice echoed down the hall. Luca, where are you? Silence. Then, a shuffling noise. Jax froze. He turned his head toward the farthest locker, where the door was cracked open just slightly. Jax moved carefully, his pulse thundering. He reached out, pushed the door open. And there he was. Luca sat curled up in the corner, his small arms wrapped tightly around his knees, his face buried against them. Jax let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He crouched down, keeping his voice steady. Hey, kiddo. Luca didn't look up. Jax's chest ached. He lowered himself fully, resting his forearms on his knees. You scared us, he said quietly. Luca's small fingers tightened around his sleeves. They were talking about you, Luca whispered. About how you're dangerous. That you hurt people. Jax's heart clenched. He swallowed hard. Who told you that? Luca shook his head. Jax exhaled slowly. Listen to me, kid, he said, his voice gentler than it had ever been. I've made mistakes. A lot of them. But I would never, ever hurt you. Luca finally looked up, his wide eyes searching Jax's face. Promise. Jax felt something in his chest crack open. Yeah, buddy. I promise. Luca hesitated, then launched forward, wrapping his arms around Jax's neck. Jax's breath caught, his arms automatically closing around the small boy. For the first time in his life, he knew what it meant to be a father. And he was never letting Luca go again. By the time they returned to the stands, Avery was waiting. Her eyes welled with relief the second she saw Luca, and she pulled him into her arms, holding him tightly. Then her gaze met Jax's. Something unspoken passed between them. A silent understanding. A silent promise. Jax wasn't going anywhere. And neither was Luca. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was family. And Jax Kane? He would fight tooth and nail to keep it. Chapter 18. Jax Kane had faced down bruisers in the NHL, fought through broken bones, and taken hits that had nearly ended his career. But nothing, had ever shaken him the way last night had. Losing sight of Luca, seeing Avery's panic, feeling that suffocating dread claw at his chest. It had changed something inside him. Now, as he stood outside Avery's house, the cold air biting at his skin, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't keep doing this, staying on the outside, waiting for an invitation that would never come. Luca was his son. And whether Avery liked it or not, he was done being shut out. Jax knocked on the door, his pulse steady, his jaw set. It took a moment before he heard movement inside. Then the door cracked open, and there she was, Avery Shaw, standing in the dim light of her hallway, her dark eyes guarded. For a long beat, neither of them spoke. Then, Jax. Her voice was tired, her fingers tightening around the edge of the door. "We need to talk," he said. Avery hesitated, then sighed and stepped back, motioning him inside. Jax walked in, closing the door behind him. The house was warm, filled with the faint scent of coffee and something familiar. Lavender, maybe. It smelled like her. Luca was nowhere in sight, which meant he was probably asleep. Good. This conversation wasn't meant for him. Avery folded her arms and leaned against the counter, watching him carefully. "I know what you're going to say." Jax arched a brow. "Do you?" She nodded, letting out a slow breath. "You're going to tell me that you want to be in Luca's life. That you have a right to be. That I never should have kept him from you." Jax didn't break eye contact. "You're right," he said, his voice low but firm. "I do want to be in his life. I do have a right. And no, you never should have kept him from me." Avery exhaled sharply, looking away. "Jax." "No," he cut her off, stepping closer. "You don't get to shut me down. Not this time." Her jaw clenched. "It's not that simple." "It is," he countered. "He's my son, Avery. I didn't know. But now I do. And I'm not walking away." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. She looked away again, her fingers tightening on the counter. "I was trying to protect him," she murmured. Jax's chest ached, but he kept his voice steady. "From me." She closed her eyes for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "From what you were," she said softly. "From the chaos, the violence. Jax, you were in a dark place back then. I watched you turn into someone I didn't recognize. And when I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't take that risk." Jax swallowed hard. He wanted to be angry. But the truth was, he couldn't blame her for that. Because she was right. The Jax Kane she had known, the one who had walked away all those years ago, wouldn't have been a good father. But he wasn't that man anymore. "I get it," he said quietly. Avery blinked, clearly startled. "You do?" Jax nodded. "Yeah. You did what you thought you had to do. I'm not saying I like it. Hell, I hate it. But I get it." Avery stared at him, her posture still tight. Jax stepped even closer, his voice softer now. "But Avery, you don't have to protect him from me anymore." Something in her expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty, hesitation. "I don't know how to let you in," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jax's heart tightened. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and touched her hand, his fingers brushing over hers. "Then let's figure it out together." Avery inhaled sharply, her body going still at the contact. Jax didn't move, didn't push. He just waited. And then, she exhaled and leaned into him, just slightly, like she didn't mean to, like it wasn't a choice but a reflex. Jax felt his pulse stutter, his entire body locking up. She was so close. For the first time in years, he could smell her skin, could see the way her lashes fluttered, could feel the warmth of her breath. 1 inch. That's all it would take. But before he could close the distance, Avery's phone buzzed loudly on the counter, shattering the moment. She jumped slightly, pulling back. Jax swore silently. Avery grabbed the phone, glancing at the screen. Her entire expression changed. "What?" Jax asked immediately. Avery's lips pressed together, her grip tightening on the phone. Then, finally, "It's Nina." Jax frowned. "And?" Avery looked up, her eyes dark with something between fear and anger. "She says we have a problem." Jax clenched his jaw. Because in Lake Placid, a problem usually meant only one thing. Dominic Voss. And whatever move he had just made. Jax had a feeling it was about to change everything. Chapter 19. The Lake Placid Invitational was the biggest event of the junior hockey season. Scouts, recruiters, and agents flooded the town, searching for the next rising star. For the Lynx, it was a chance to prove they were more than an underdog team fighting against corruption. For Jax Kane, it was a battle on multiple fronts. He stood in the locker room, arms crossed, watching his team lace up their skates, taping sticks, going through their pre-game rituals. The air was thick with nerves and anticipation. This was more than just a tournament. This was war. And Jax could feel Voss watching. From the moment the Lynx had qualified, Dominic Voss's presence had loomed over everything. He had been in the stands, in the league meetings, shaking hands with officials and sponsors, acting like he owned the damn place. Which, in many ways, he did. Jax wasn't stupid. This wasn't just about hockey anymore. Voss wasn't just trying to control the league. He was sending a message. And now, with the tournament starting, Jax knew the next few days would determine everything. His team's future. His own future. And most importantly, Luca's. The crowd roared as the teams took the ice for warm-ups. The energy in the arena was electric, a mix of excitement and tension. Jax stood behind the bench, his sharp gaze scanning the stands. There he was. Voss sat in a luxury box, watching with calculated ease. Sipping a drink like this was just another day at the office. Jax's jaw tightened. He could feel it, the pressure, the unspoken threat. Then, just as his gaze moved away, he saw her. Avery. She was in the stands, her expression tense, her arms crossed as she watched the ice. But she wasn't alone. Luca was beside her. Jax inhaled sharply, his pulse skipping. This was the first time Luca was watching him as his father. And Jax swore. No matter what happened tonight, he wasn't going to let him down. The puck dropped, and the Invitational was officially underway. The Lynx came out firing, their skating crisp, their passes sharp. Jax had drilled into them that they weren't here to be victims. They were here to fight. But by the second period, the game had turned ugly. Voss's influence was on full display. Blown calls. Missed penalties. A hit to Langley that should have been a 5-minute major but wasn't even whistled. Jax's fists clenched at his sides, his rage barely contained. Stay focused. Victor muttered beside him. You lose your temper, he wins. Jax exhaled sharply, forcing himself to breathe. Voss wanted him to snap. Wanted him to prove the headlines right. Not tonight. Instead, Jax stepped to the edge of the bench and shouted, Lynx, keep your heads. Play your game. And damn it, they listened. By the third period, the Lynx fought back. Langley sniped a goal from the blue line. Reese Taylor crashed the net, forcing a rebound past the goalie. And with 2 minutes left, the Lynx were up by 1. Jax's chest tightened as the clock wound down. Then, in the final seconds, the Falcons pulled their goalie. The arena held its breath. Jax gripped the boards as the puck moved fast, bodies colliding, sticks slashing. Then, a breakaway. Langley stole the puck, racing down the ice, an empty net ahead. Jax's heart pounded. Then, a hard slash from behind. Langley crashed to the ice. The arena erupted in boos. Jax snapped. That's a penalty, he bellowed, stepping forward. Are you blind? The ref hesitated. Then, no call. Jax's vision went red. Voss had his hands in this game. Jax stepped onto the bench, shouting again. That was a damn penalty. The ref glanced toward the stands, toward Voss, before skating away. Jax's stomach curled with disgust. He turned toward the clock. Only 5 seconds left. And then, the final buzzer sounded. Lynx win. The bench erupted, players storming the ice in celebration. Jax didn't move. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. As the celebration died down, Jax walked through the tunnels toward the exit, his mind still buzzing. Then, a voice stopped him. Quite the game, Kane. Jax turned slowly. Dominic Voss stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his expression smug. Jax's blood boiled. Enjoying the show? Jax asked, his tone mocking. Voss smirked. I have to admit, you put up a fight. But we both know how this ends. Jax stepped closer, lowering his voice. Yeah? And how's that? Voss's smirk widened. You can win a game, Kane. But you won't win the war. Jax clenched his jaw. Voss leaned in slightly. You should walk away while you still can. Jax smiled coldly. Not a chance. Voss chuckled, stepping back. Suit yourself. Then he walked away, leaving Jax standing there, seething, brimming with a fire that refused to die. Because now? It wasn't just about winning games. It was about taking Voss down, for good. And Jax? He was ready for war. Chapter 20. The early morning light cut through the fog hovering over Lake Placid as Jax Kane stood outside Nina Torres's office, gripping the flash drive she had given him the night before. His jaw was tight, his mind racing with everything that had unfolded in the last 24 hours. The rigged game, the disappearing penalties, the broken system that Voss had built like a fortress around himself. Jax had spent his entire career fighting battles that had been put in front of him. He had been the enforcer, the hammer, the guy they called on when things got ugly. But this was different. This wasn't about fists. This was about burning the whole damn empire to the ground. He took a breath, adjusting the collar of his jacket before pushing open the door. The small newsroom smelled like stale coffee and ink, a reminder that real journalism still thrived in some places. Nina was sitting at her desk, scrolling through something on her laptop, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She looked up when she heard him. You look like hell, she muttered, closing her laptop. Feel like it too. Jax tossed the flash drive onto her desk. Tell me that's enough. Nina picked it up, flipping it between her fingers before plugging it into her laptop. It's a start, she said, eyes narrowing as she scanned the files. Financial records, wire transfers, emails. Damn, Skylar wasn't playing around when she gave you this. Jax folded his arms, watching as she skimmed through the evidence. It's enough to make people ask questions, right? Oh, they'll ask, Nina said, clicking on an email chain between a referee and a shadow account connected to Voss Enterprises. But if you think this alone will take him down, you're wrong. Voss has spent years covering his tracks. He'll say these are doctored. He'll spin it before we can even print the first article. Jax exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. So what do we do? Nina leaned back in her chair, thinking. We get more. We need someone on the inside. Someone who's seen it firsthand. Jax stared at her. Someone like who? She hesitated, then nodded toward the laptop screen. Jax followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped when he saw the name. Viktor Petrov. The old man's house was quiet, the kind of quiet that came with age and solitude. Jax knocked twice, stepping back and waiting. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, and Viktor Petrov's sharp blue eyes peered out at him. Figured you'd be coming by, Viktor muttered, stepping aside to let Jax in. The living room was cluttered with old hockey memorabilia, trophies gathering dust, faded photos of championship teams. A lifetime in the sport, captured in frames and forgotten in time. You know why I'm here, Jax said, crossing his arms. Viktor nodded, walking toward the kitchen, his cane tapping softly against the hardwood floor. I do, he said. And I'll tell you right now, Kane, you're about to start a fight you can't win. Jax let out a dry laugh. Wouldn't be my first. Viktor turned, his face serious. No, he said. But it might be your last. Jax swallowed the retort that sat on his tongue. Instead, he watched as Viktor pulled a bottle of vodka from the counter, pouring himself a glass but leaving it untouched. I spent my life in this game, Viktor said quietly, staring at the drink. I watched good men break their bodies for it. Watched kids sell their souls for a chance at a dream. He looked up, his gaze piercing. And I let it happen. Jax clenched his jaw. Voss has been running this league like a crime syndicate. Buying players, paying off refs, fixing games. He stepped forward. And you know it. You've seen it. Hell, I bet you were part of it at some point. Viktor's expression didn't change. I was. Jax stilled. He had expected a fight, some kind of defense, but Viktor just sat there, owning it. I never touched money, Viktor continued, his voice rough. But I knew where it went. I knew which players were pushed forward, which ones were buried. And I stayed quiet. His grip tightened around the glass. Because I was a coward. Jax exhaled, trying to temper the frustration rising in his chest. So talk now. Give me something I can use. Victor studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, I have something, he admitted. But if I give it to you, there's no going back. Jax didn't hesitate. I don't want to go back. Victor nodded slowly. He pushed himself up from the chair and disappeared down the hall. When he returned, he was holding a worn-out cassette recorder. Jax frowned. Seriously? Victor set it on the table, his face unreadable. Play it. Jax pressed play, and the moment the voice crackled through the old speaker, his stomach turned to stone. It was Voss. You don't ask questions, you don't screw this up, and you don't talk to anyone outside this circle. Do you understand? I don't care how it looks. The links are done. Kane is done. We move the pieces, we make the calls, and we shut it all down before anyone gets in our way. Jax's blood ran cold. The date on the tape was 2 weeks ago. This wasn't old corruption. This was happening right now. Victor exhaled. That's your proof, he said. It's not enough to put him in jail, but it's enough to start a fire. Jax stood, gripping the recorder like a weapon. Then let's burn him down. Victor's eyes darkened. You sure you're ready for this, Kane? Jax clenched his jaw. I was born for this. By the time Jax walked out of Victor's house, his phone was already ringing. Avery. He answered on the first ring. Avery. Jax, get to the arena. Her voice was tight, urgent. His stomach dropped. What's wrong? It's Luca, Avery said, her breath uneven. Something's wrong. Jax's blood turned to ice. He didn't wait for another word. He ran. Chapter 21. The snow fell in thick sheets as Jax Kane's truck tore through the streets of Lake Placid, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His pulse pounded in his ears, his breath coming in short bursts as Avery's words echoed in his head. It's Luca. Something's wrong. He didn't ask for details. Didn't waste time demanding an explanation. Luca was his son, and if something had happened to him, there wasn't a force on this planet that could stop Jax from fixing it. As he pulled into the arena parking lot, he barely threw the truck into park before jumping out, his boots crunching against the frozen pavement. The moment he stepped through the doors, the sharp, sterile scent of ice and sweat hit him, but it was the unmistakable chaos in the air that made his stomach tighten. People were gathered near the locker room entrance, voices urgent, panicked. Jax pushed through the small crowd, his breath coming faster as he spotted Avery kneeling beside Luca, her hands cupping his small face, checking him over. Luca was sitting on the floor, his dark eyes wide, his face pale beneath the overhead lights. What happened? Jax demanded, his voice rough, shaking. Avery barely looked up. Someone hit him. Jax's blood went ice cold. What? Avery's jaw was tight, her body tense. I turned my back for 2 seconds, Jax. She exhaled sharply. I was talking to Langley's dad, and when I turned around, Luca was on the ground. Someone slammed him into the wall. Jax felt everything inside him snap. Who? His voice was low, deadly. Avery shook her head. I don't know. No one saw it happen. Jax's hands clenched into fists. He turned, his body thrumming with an energy that demanded violence. Someone saw something, he growled. He turned toward the nearest player, one of the Lynx defensemen, Cody Harper, a kid with good instincts and a sharp eye. Jax's voice was firm. Unforgiving. Harper, who the hell did this? The kid hesitated, looking between Avery and Luca before swallowing hard. Jax took a step closer, his anger barely contained. Talk. Now. Harper swallowed again. I think it was one of the Falcons guys. The older one, Blaine Carter. He was standing near Luca before it happened. Then he just walked off like nothing happened. Jax saw red. Blaine Carter. The same kid who had taken the cheap shot on Dylan Mercer. The same kid whose family had financial ties to Voss. The same kid who had no business putting his hands on Jax's son. Avery must have seen the shift in his expression because she immediately stood, stepping between him and the exit. Jax. Her voice was warning, firm. Don't. He barely heard her. His fists ached from how tightly he was clenching them, his entire body burning with the need to hurt someone. "Get out of my way, Avery." She didn't move. "You go after him, Jax, and Voss wins." His breath came sharper now, his chest rising and falling too fast. "That bastard put his hands on my kid." Avery's eyes flashed. "I know. And we will handle it. But not like this." Jax's hands shook. He had spent years fighting other people's battles. Taking hits. Protecting teammates. But this? This was different. Luca was his. And no one touched what was his. "Jax." Avery's voice was quieter now, but it still held steel. "Luca's watching." That hit him harder than a punch to the jaw. Jax forced himself to breathe, his body tight with restraint. Then, finally, he turned back. Luca was still sitting on the floor, staring at him, wide-eyed. Jax inhaled sharply and dropped to his knees beside him. "Hey, buddy." His voice was softer now, calmer, even though he was anything but. Luca blinked up at him. "You're mad." Jax exhaled. "Not at you." He hesitated. "Are you hurt?" Luca shook his head. "Just scared." Jax's chest tightened painfully. He had been gone for so much of Luca's life. He hadn't been there when he took his first steps, hadn't been there for birthdays, for scraped knees, for bad dreams. But he was here now. And he wasn't going anywhere. "You don't have to be scared, kid." Jax reached out, gently resting a hand on Luca's shoulder. "No one's ever gonna hurt you again. I promise." Luca hesitated, then did something that wrecked Jax completely. He leaned forward and wrapped his small arms around Jax's neck. Jax froze. His breath caught in his throat, his entire body going still as Luca's tiny fingers clung to his jacket. For a moment, he couldn't move. Couldn't even breathe. Then carefully, like he was holding something fragile, priceless, he wrapped his arms around Luca and held on. Avery watched them, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But Jax didn't let go. He had spent years running, spent years trying to fight the wrong battles. Not anymore. Because this was his fight now. And he would never let Luca, or Avery, stand alone again. Chapter 22. Jax Kane wasn't a man who took orders well. So when Avery Shaw stood in front of him, telling him not to go after Blaine Carter, every instinct in his body rebelled against the idea. But she was right. Voss was watching. The League was watching. If Jax lost control now, it wouldn't just be his reputation on the line. It would be the Lynx, Luca, everything he was fighting for. So instead of tracking Blaine Carter down and beating the kid into the ice, Jax did something even better. He called Nina Torres. By the time he pulled up to her office, he was still buzzing with adrenaline, his body tight with the need for violence he wasn't allowed to release. Nina was already waiting inside, her laptop open, her phone pressed to her ear as she paced the room like she was waiting for a storm to hit. "Tell me you have something," Jax muttered the moment he walked in. Nina hung up her call and turned to face him. "Oh, I have plenty. And you're gonna want to sit down for this." Jax didn't sit. Nina sighed and clicked something on her laptop, turning the screen toward him. Jax's stomach clenched when he saw the name on the document. Luca Voss. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice low, sharp. Nina exhaled. "Financial records. Trust fund agreements. Legal documents that tie Luca's name to Dominic Voss in ways that don't make sense unless you know what Voss is really after." Jax's pulse thundered in his ears. "Explain." Nina leaned forward. "Voss has been making payments in Luca's name for years. On the surface, it looks like sponsorships, scholarships, stuff meant to support young hockey players. But the amounts are too high, too frequent, too damn suspicious." She tapped the screen. The real kicker? Some of this money has been laundered through shell companies. Companies that have nothing to do with hockey but everything to do with Voss's business deals. Jax gritted his teeth. "What's the angle?" Nina's gaze was steady. "He's trying to claim Luca as his asset. Maybe not legally, not yet. But financially? He's making sure Luca is tied to him in ways that make it harder for Avery, or anyone else, to break away cleanly." Jax's hands curled into fists. Voss wasn't just controlling the league. He was controlling Luca's future. Jax had been angry before. This was something else entirely. "I need more," he said, his voice low, dangerous. Nina nodded. "I'm working on it. But you need to talk to Avery. She has to know about this." Jax exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," he muttered. "She does." Avery was waiting for him when he got to her house. The moment she opened the door, Jax knew something was wrong. Her eyes were stormy, guarded, and her grip on the doorknob was white-knuckled. "Luca's asleep," she said. "So whatever this is, keep your voice down." Jax nodded, stepping inside. He didn't waste time. "You need to see this," he said, pulling out his phone and handing it to her. The files Nina had uncovered were right there, glaring back at them like a silent bomb waiting to go off. Avery frowned as she scrolled through them. Then she froze. Her breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the phone. Jax watched as realization dawned, as the weight of what she was looking at crashed down around her like an avalanche. "No," she whispered. Jax exhaled. "Avery." "No," she said again, sharper this time. She looked up at him, anger, fear, and something deeper flashing in her eyes. "He wouldn't." She shook her head. "He wouldn't go this far." Jax's jaw tightened. "He already has." Avery turned away, pressing a hand to her temple. Her shoulders rose and fell in uneven breaths, and for the first time since Jax had come back, she looked truly shaken. "He's been playing the long game," Jax said quietly. "Making sure Luca stays under his influence. Making sure you can't cut ties cleanly." Avery closed her eyes. "This isn't about me, is it?" Jax hesitated. Then, softly, "No. It's about Luca. And what Voss plans to do with him." Avery turned back to him, her gaze desperate, pleading. "Jax, we can't let him win." Jax nodded. "We won't." Avery exhaled shakily. Then, before he could say anything else, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Jax stilled. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, slowly, carefully, he wrapped his arms around her too. She was warm, small against him, but stronger than anyone he had ever known. Jax closed his eyes. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was a war. And they were in it together. Chapter 23. Jax Kane had always known how to take a hit. But this was different. This wasn't a punch thrown on the ice, a hard check against the boards, or even the sting of a cheap shot when the ref wasn't looking. This was Dominic Voss tightening his grip, playing a game that went beyond hockey, beyond the rules. Voss had always been a predator, moving pieces on a chessboard no one else could see. But now, Jax could see the board clearly, and he wasn't about to let Voss win. Jax sat in his truck outside Ironwood Arena, gripping the steering wheel as the weight of the last 24 hours pressed down on him. The rigged games, the financial manipulation, the attack on Luca, all of it was tied together. And now? Now Voss was going for the kill shot. A notification buzzed on his phone, dragging him back to reality. Breaking news: former NHL enforcer Jax Kane caught in bar altercation. Jax's stomach dropped. What the hell? He tapped the article, his rage building with every word. Witnesses claim Jax Kane was seen at Murphy's bar last night, heavily intoxicated and involved in a heated altercation with another patron. Sources report that Kane appeared aggressive and erratic, leading many to question whether his temper has truly been controlled since his return to junior hockey. Jax's blood ran cold. He hadn't been at Murphy's last night. But the article was written like fact, the words twisting around his past, weaponizing his reputation against him. And the worst part? There were pictures. Photos of him at a bar, seemingly mid-argument with a stranger, his expression furious, unhinged. It was all bullshit. The pictures had been edited, staged, completely fabricated. And there was only one person who had the power to pull something like this off. Voss. Jax clenched his jaw, his knuckles aching from how hard he was gripping the wheel. First, Voss had rigged the games. Then, he had gone after Luca. And now? Now he was coming after Jax himself. This was a setup. And Jax wasn't going to let it stand. By the time Jax walked into Nina Torres's office, His entire body was coiled with fury. She took one look at him, sighed, and gestured toward her laptop. Yeah. I saw. Jax slammed his phone onto the desk. Tell me you can prove this is fake. Nina didn't even hesitate. Already working on it. She spun the laptop toward him. The footage they used? It's not even from last night. That's from a bar in Buffalo, 2 years ago. Someone cropped out the actual guy you were arguing with and replaced him with a random local from Lake Placid to make it look current. Jax's rage burned hotter. They're trying to get me fired, he muttered. Trying to make me look like the same guy they said I was before. Nina nodded. It's classic Voss. Make you look unstable, unfit to be around kids, unfit to coach. Then, when the league pulls you out of the links, he has no more resistance left in this town. Jax exhaled sharply, dragging a hand over his face. Can you prove it's fake before this spreads further? I can, Nina said. But it won't be enough. Jax frowned. What do you mean? Nina leaned forward, her voice low, serious. Even if I expose this, even if we show it was faked, the damage is already done. People won't care about the truth. They'll remember the headlines. And Voss knows that. Jax's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about clearing his name. This was about breaking Voss's hold on the league before he destroyed everything. Jax clenched his jaw. Then we need something bigger. Something he can't spin. Nina studied him for a long moment. Then finally she said, we go public with the Luca connection. Jax stiffened. No. Luca wasn't part of this war. Not an option, he muttered. Jax. I said no. Nina let out a sharp breath, rubbing her temple. Then we need to hit him somewhere he doesn't expect. Jax's mind raced. Then it hit him. Skylar. She had already given them the first batch of evidence. But if anyone knew more about Voss's real game, it was her. I'll handle it, Jax said, turning toward the door. Jax. He didn't stop. Because he already knew what he had to do. Murphy's bar was quieter than usual, but Jax barely paid attention to the few locals nursing drinks in the back booths. His focus was only on her. Skylar Rhodes sat at the bar, a drink in her hand, her dark eyes sharp as she watched him approach. You're not exactly subtle, Kane, she muttered as he slid onto the stool beside her. Jax wasn't in the mood for games. You owe me an explanation. Skylar arched a brow. Do I? You told me you wanted Voss gone, Jax said, his voice dangerously low. But now he's using your tricks, your media ties, to take me down. He leaned in. So tell me, Skylar, are you with him or against him? For the first time, Skylar hesitated. It was quick, a flicker of something uncertain in her gaze, but Jax caught it. Skylar, he pushed. She exhaled, swirling the drink in her hand. Then, finally, I gave you the flash drive because I knew what Voss was doing, she said, quietly. But I also knew what would happen if you started digging. She glanced at him. He doesn't lose, Jax. Not the way you think he will. Jax clenched his jaw. So what? You're scared. Skylar laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. I've seen what happens to people who try to take him down. Her voice was almost haunted now. You think a few financial records are going to stop him? You have no idea what he's really capable of. Jax's stomach tightened. Then tell me. Skylar hesitated again, gripping her glass. Then, finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out another USB drive. Everything, she whispered. Every deal, every bribe, every name. Jax's pulse pounded. Skylar met his gaze. This isn't just a fight, she murmured. This is war. Jax took the drive, his jaw set, his blood boiling. Then it's time I started playing like it. Chapter 24. Jax Kane wasn't a patient man. But as he sat outside Viktor Petrov's nursing home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly the leather strained under his fingers, he forced himself to breathe. Skylar's latest evidence had given him everything he needed, the missing pieces of Voss's corrupt empire. The bribes, the rigged contracts, the off-the-record deals that had ruined countless players' careers before they even had a shot. But none of it would mean a damn thing unless he could prove it in a way the league couldn't ignore. Which was why he was here. Viktor Petrov was the only one who could tie it all together. Jax shoved open the door and stepped into the cold, bracing himself for what was coming. Inside, the nursing home smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. He spotted Viktor near the common area, sitting in his wheelchair, a blanket draped over his legs. His once powerful frame had thinned with age, but his sharp blue eyes still held steel. The moment Viktor saw Jax, something in his gaze shifted. "You look like hell," Viktor muttered. Jax snorted. "Yeah, well, I've had a long week." Viktor nodded toward the empty chair beside him. "Sit. You didn't come here to trade insults." Jax dropped into the chair, elbows resting on his knees. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, "I need your help," Jax said, cutting straight to the point. Viktor sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You want me to go on record against Voss?" Jax stiffened. "You already knew?" Viktor's eyes darkened. "I was his pawn before you ever laced up your first pair of skates, Kane. I've seen men try to take him down before. None of them ever made it very far." Jax's jaw tightened. "This time will be different." Viktor let out a dry laugh. "You sound like a fool." Jax leaned in, his voice low, hard. "And you sound like a man who's scared." Viktor's entire body tensed. Then, slowly, his expression shifted. Jax had hit a nerve. "You think I don't know what he's done?" Viktor's voice was hoarse, laced with something thick and raw. "I watched good players get buried because they wouldn't play his game. I kept quiet when he paid off referees, when he shut down kids before they had a chance to fight for themselves. And his voice broke for just a second. "I let him do it." Jax's stomach twisted. Viktor exhaled slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the arms of his wheelchair. "But you're right," he muttered. "I am scared." He met Jax's gaze. "Because when you go after a man like Voss, you better be ready to lose everything." Jax's breath hitched. He knew what that felt like. And he wasn't about to let it happen again. "You won't lose this time," Jax said quietly. "You'll finally get to tell the truth." Viktor was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he nodded. "I'll do it," he said. Jax exhaled sharply. "Finally." "Good," Jax muttered, standing. "Then let's take the bastard down." By the time Jax left the nursing home, his phone was already ringing. "Nina." He answered immediately. "Tell me you got it." "Oh, I got it," Nina said, her voice sharp with victory. Viktor just recorded his full confession. "Everything. The bribes, the game fixing, the threats. We're taking this public, Kane." Jax gritted his teeth, his pulse pounding. "How soon?" "Tonight," Nina said. "We're going live." Jax let out a slow breath, staring at the darkening sky. This was it. The beginning of the end. For Voss. For the lies that had held this league hostage for too long. And for the ghosts of Jax's past. Because after tonight, there was no turning back. Chapter 25. Jax Kane had never cared much for the media. He had spent most of his career avoiding reporters, dodging cameras, and keeping his answers to a minimum when forced in front of a microphone. Words weren't his weapon. He let his fists speak for him on the ice. But tonight, for the first time in his life, words were the only thing that could win this fight. He stood in the shadows of Ironwood Arena, gripping his phone, waiting for Nina Torres to go live with Viktor Petrov's confession. The air was thick with tension, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on him. Avery stood beside him, her arms crossed, her face tight with worry. "This is dangerous, Jax," she murmured. He didn't take his eyes off the screen. "It's the only move we have left." Avery exhaled, shifting on her feet. "Voss isn't just going to let this go. He'll fight back. And if you think he won't come after you, after Luca," her voice caught, but she steadied herself. "You're wrong." Jax's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. But Voss had been winning for too damn long. Not tonight. The moment Nina's livestream started, Jax felt the shift. It began slowly. The video feed showed Nina sitting in her office, her expression deadly serious. Then the screen split, and Viktor's face appeared, pale, aged but steady. Jax held his breath. "My name is Viktor Petrov," the old man said. And for more than 20 years, I have been a silent witness to one of the largest corruption schemes in junior hockey. Jax closed his eyes for a beat, his pulse hammering. The confession was brutal. Victor laid out everything: the bribes, the rigged games, the money laundering. He named players whose careers had been destroyed, families who had been threatened, and most importantly, he named Dominic Voss as the mastermind behind it all. The chat on the live stream exploded. Holy SHD, is this real? Asterisk. Voss is done. They have to investigate this, right? Petrov's got nothing to lose. Why would he lie? Jax exhaled slowly, watching the numbers climb. Hundreds. Thousands. Tens of thousands. The world was listening. Avery's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked at it and muttered, "It's already spreading. Reporters are picking it up. The league is going to have to respond." Jax's phone buzzed too, but it wasn't good news. He glanced at the screen. His stomach dropped. Voss. The bastard was calling him directly. Jax answered without hesitation. "You watching the show, Voss?" Silence on the other end. Then, a slow, measured chuckle. "You think you've won, Kane?" Voss's voice was smooth, controlled. "This little stunt of yours? It won't hold." Jax's grip tightened. "Victor gave you up. It's over." Voss chuckled again, and Jax's stomach coiled with unease. "You don't get it, do you?" Voss murmured. "I don't lose. I adapt." Jax's blood ran cold. Then, Voss's voice lowered, turning sharp as a blade. "Tell me, Kane. Where's Luca right now?" Jax's heart stopped. Every muscle in his body locked up. He turned to Avery. Her face went pale instantly. "Luca." Jax bolted toward his truck, Avery right behind him, panic flooding his system. Luca had been at a friend's house for a sleepover. He was supposed to be safe. But if Voss was threatening him now, then that safety was already gone. Jax slammed the truck into gear and tore out of the lot, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheel. "Call them," he ordered. "Right now." Avery's fingers were already dialing. The line rang once, twice, then someone picked up. Jax didn't even wait. "Where's Luca?" A pause. Then, a voice filled with hesitation. He left about 20 minutes ago. Someone came to pick him up. Said you sent them." Jax's stomach dropped into freefall. Avery let out a strangled noise, her hand covering her mouth. "Who?" Jax's voice was dangerous now, barely controlled. "Who picked him up? Who the hell took my son?" I don't know," the voice stammered. "A man in a suit. I thought." Jax slammed the brakes, spinning the truck into a sharp turn, his pulse roaring in his ears. This wasn't just a threat. This wasn't just a warning. Voss had taken Luca. And Jax was about to tear this town apart to get him back. Chapter 26. The tires screamed as Jax Kane's truck tore through the streets of Lake Placid, the needle on the speedometer creeping dangerously close to the limit. His grip on the wheel was tight enough to break bone, his pulse thundering in his ears. Luca was gone. Someone, Voss's people, had taken him. And Jax was going to find him. Beside him, Avery was frantically calling everyone she could think of. Parents, security, the damn police. But Jax already knew the truth. The cops wouldn't help. Not against a man like Voss. They needed to find Luca themselves. Jax's mind raced. Where would Voss take him? Not his office, too public. Not his personal estate, too obvious. Then it hit him. The arena. It was the one place Voss controlled completely, the one place he could keep things quiet. Jax gritted his teeth and gunned the accelerator, his truck slicing through the snowy roads, headlights barely cutting through the thickening night. When they pulled into Ironwood Arena's lot, the place was dark, closed for the night. But Jax knew better. Voss was here. And so was Luca. He killed the engine and was out of the truck before Avery even unbuckled her seatbelt. "Jax," she started, but he was already moving, his entire body coiled with fury. The main doors were locked. Jax didn't care. He kicked them in, the metal shuddering under his force as he stormed inside. The arena was silent, the air thick with the sharp scent of ice and old sweat. The lights were dim, just enough glow from the emergency exits to see vague shapes in the dark. Then, a voice. "You really don't know when to stop, do you, Kane?" Jax's blood ran cold. "Voss." The bastard's voice echoed through the empty arena, and as Jax's eyes adjusted, he saw them, shadows near center ice. Voss stood there in his tailored coat, his posture relaxed. And beside him, Luca. Jax's lungs seized. Luca stood there, wide-eyed, small, his arms hugged tight to his chest. He wasn't hurt, not yet, but Jax could see the fear in his eyes. And that? That was enough to break Jax completely. "Let him go," Jax growled, stepping onto the ice without hesitation. Voss smirked, his breath curling in the cold air. "You came alone." Predictable. Jax took another step, fists clenching so hard his knuckles cracked. "You wanted me here? I'm here. But you don't touch my kid." Voss exhaled, shaking his head like Jax was a damn disappointment. "You still don't get it, do you?" He nodded toward Luca. "This was never about him. This was about you." Jax stilled. Voss smiled, slow and knowing. "You needed motivation. Now you have it." Jax's rage burned white-hot. "You used my son to bait me?" Voss stepped forward, his smirk growing. "And it worked, didn't it?" Jax's vision went red. This wasn't a game. Voss wasn't going to let him walk away. Not without a fight. Jax moved first. He lunged, his fist cutting through the air like a hammer. Voss sidestepped just in time, but Jax still caught him in the ribs, the satisfying thud of impact ringing through the empty arena. Voss stumbled back, coughing, his smirk wiped clean. "You really are just a thug, aren't you?" he spat. Jax didn't give him time to recover. He grabbed Voss by the collar, slamming him into the boards so hard the glass rattled. "You went after my son," Jax growled, his voice low, dangerous. "You think I'm just gonna let that slide?" Voss grinned through the pain, blood blooming at the corner of his mouth. "You're not thinking straight, Kane." Jax's fingers tightened. "Oh, I'm thinking perfectly." Voss's eyes flickered past him. Jax barely had time to register the movement behind him before something slammed into the back of his head. Stars exploded in his vision. His knees buckled. And then, darkness. Jax came to seconds later, his body sluggish, his pulse pounding in his skull. He was on the ice, flat on his back, the cold seeping through his jacket. Voss was standing over him, smug as ever, while one of his goons, a thick-necked bastard Jax vaguely recognized as one of Voss's enforcers, held a crowbar in his grip. "See," Voss murmured. "This is what happens when you don't know when to quit." Jax's hands twitched. He needed to move. Now. But before he could, a new voice cut through the air. "Step away from him." Jax's stomach flipped. Avery. She stood at the edge of the ice, her eyes blazing, her hands steady despite the fear in them. Voss turned, grinning. "Ah, Dr. Shaw. Perfect timing." Avery didn't back down. "You touch him again, and I swear to God." "You'll do what?" Voss interrupted, tilting his head. "You can't fight me, Avery. Neither of you can." Jax pushed himself up, his head throbbing but his fury sharper than ever. "You really think this ends with you standing, Voss?" Jax spat. Voss arched a brow. "You're outnumbered, Kane. What exactly do you think is going to happen?" Jax smirked. "You ever hear of live streaming?" Voss froze. Avery lifted her phone, the red recording light blinking. "Everything you just said," she murmured. "It's already out there." Voss's expression shifted, his easy confidence fracturing. Jax grinned. "Yeah, you're screwed, buddy." For the first time, Voss looked nervous. He took a step back. Then, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. Avery's smirk grew. "You might want to run." Voss cursed under his breath, his goon already backing toward the exits. But Jax wasn't letting him off that easy. He lunged one last time, grabbing Voss by the collar and slamming his fist into his face, sending the bastard crashing onto the ice. Then he stepped back, shaking out his bleeding knuckles, as the arena doors burst open. The police stormed in. And just like that, Dominic Voss's reign was over. Chapter 27. The roar of the crowd at Ironwood Arena was deafening, a wave of thunderous applause and disbelief as Jax Kane stood on the ice, his knuckles still raw from the last punch he had thrown. Dominic Voss lay sprawled, dazed, and finally, for the first time in his life, powerless. The flashing red and blue lights from the entrance cast an eerie glow across the rink as Lake Placid's law enforcement stormed in, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Jax stepped back, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in deep, controlled movements. Avery was still gripping her phone, her livestream recording the moment Voss's empire officially crumbled. It was over. The corruption, the bribes, the intimidation tactics, all of it had been laid bare for the world to see. Voss groaned as two officers grabbed him, roughly hauling him up. He struggled for a moment before realizing it was pointless. Jax watched as Voss's smug expression finally cracked. He turned toward Jax, his lips split, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think this changes anything?" Voss sneered, his voice hoarse. Jax's smile was slow, cold, satisfied. "It changes everything." The officers pulled Voss toward the exit, the crowd going wild. The entire town had come together, watching their longtime kingpin fall. Jax exhaled, rolling his shoulders. The tension in his body was finally easing, the weight of the fight lifting just slightly. But then, a tiny movement caught his eye. Luca. Jax's stomach twisted as he turned, scanning the rink. His son stood just off the bench, small and wide-eyed, watching everything unfold. For a second, Jax panicked. Had he seen too much? Was he scared? Had he just watched his father throw a punch and take a man down in front of an entire crowd? Jax started forward. But before he could say a word, Luca grinned. A big, toothy, full-faced grin. And then, to Jax's utter shock, Luca threw his hands in the air and cheered. Jax froze, his chest tightening in a way he didn't expect. Luca wasn't scared. He wasn't worried. He was proud. Jax let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. He took another step, but Avery beat him to it. She knelt down, pulling Luca close, whispering something only he could hear. Luca nodded, excited, bouncing on his feet like this was the most thrilling thing he'd ever seen in his life. Jax finally made his way over, dropping to his knees so he could meet Luca's gaze directly. "You okay, buddy?" Luca nodded furiously. "That was awesome." Jax let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head. "I don't know if awesome is the right word for it, kid." Luca tilted his head, thinking hard. "Epic." Jax grinned. "Better." Luca bounced again, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged Jax around the neck. Jax's entire world stopped moving. He hesitated just for a second before wrapping his arms around Luca's small body, holding him close. "Does this mean you won?" Luca asked, his voice muffled against Jax's shoulder. Jax swallowed hard. "Yeah," he murmured. "We won." And for the first time in a long, long time it felt real. The next day, Ironwood Arena was buzzing. The town had gathered again, not for a scandal, not for a fight, but for a celebration. Despite everything that had happened, the Lake Placid Invitational Final was still happening tonight. The Lynx had made it all the way, and Jax was determined to give them the moment they deserved. He stood in the locker room, watching as his team laced up their skates, nervous energy thick in the air. Langley sat on the bench, his fingers tapping anxiously on his knee pads. "You good, Cap?" Jax asked. Langley exhaled, shaking out his hands. "Yeah, just doesn't feel real." Jax nodded. "It's real." He clapped a hand on Langley's shoulder. "And you're about to go out there and prove to everyone why we belong here." Langley nodded, his confidence building. Jax straightened, looking at all his players. "Boys, we've been through hell to get here. But none of that matters now. Tonight we play our game. We don't let them control the pace. We don't let them dictate our moves. We play our hockey. And we win." The players roared their agreement, sticks clashing against the floor. Jax nodded. "Let's do this." The crowd was electric as the teams took the ice. Jax stood behind the bench, arms crossed, watching as his players lined up for the face-off. Then, just as the puck dropped, Luca's voice rang through the stands. "Go, Dad." Jax stiffened. Then slowly, carefully he turned. Luca was standing in the front row, wearing a Lynx jersey that was too big for him, bouncing on his feet. Avery stood beside him, smiling softly. Jax's chest tightened so hard it hurt. Dad. Luca had called him Dad. And for the first time in his entire life, Jax Kane felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The game began. And this time, Jax wasn't fighting alone. Chapter 28. The roar of the crowd at Ironwood Arena was deafening. Jax Kane stood behind the bench, his hands gripping the boards so tight his knuckles ached. The Lake Placid Invitational Final was down to its last 30 seconds, and the Lynx were leading 3-2. This was it. Everything, the fights, the corruption, the battles on and off the ice, had led to this moment. And now? They just had to hold on. His players were gasping for breath, exhaustion thick in the air, but they were still fighting. Langley and Reese had locked down the neutral zone, their skates cutting sharp lines into the ice as they forced the Huskies to the outside. The Lynx's goalie, Nate Parker, was crouched low, ready for anything. Jax glanced at the stands, his chest tightening instantly. Luca was there, gripping the railing, his tiny face tight with focus. His son. His reason for fighting. Avery was beside him, one hand clutching her chest, the other holding Luca close. Jax turned back just in time to see the Huskies pull their goalie, sending an extra skater onto the ice. Stay smart. Jax barked. No dumb plays. The Huskies crashed the zone, their best forward cutting toward the net, a breakaway. Jax's heart slammed against his ribs. The player faked left, then right, his stick snapping forward. But Parker was ready. He lunged sideways, his glove flashing out. And he caught it. The arena exploded. Jax roared, slamming his hands onto the boards as the final buzzer sounded. Game over. The Lynx had won. The players erupted, gloves flying into the air, bodies crashing into each other in wild celebration. The bench cleared, players rushing onto the ice, piling onto Parker, screaming and laughing. Jax didn't move. He just stood there taking it all in. They had done it. They had fought for everything. And they had won. A sharp movement in the stands caught his eye. Then, before Jax could react, Luca was running down the steps, dodging through the crowd heading straight for him. Jax barely had time to brace himself before Luca launched off the last step and straight into his arms. Jax caught him easily, lifting him high off the ground, his arms tightening instinctively around his son. "Dad, we won!" Luca shouted, his voice full of pure joy. Jax's entire world froze. His chest tightened, his throat burning. Luca had called him Dad again. Not hesitantly. Not by accident. But because he meant it. Jax closed his eyes, pressing his face against Luca's small shoulder, holding him closer than ever before. "You were right, buddy," he whispered, voice rough. "We won." When he finally pulled back, Luca's grin was unstoppable. "Did you see how fast Langley skated? And Parker's save? That was so cool." Jax laughed, ruffling Luca's hair. "Yeah, kid. It was." And then, Avery was there. She had been crying, but she was smiling, her eyes full of something deeper than relief. Jax set Luca down, but before he could say a word, Avery took 2 quick steps forward, cupped his face in her hands, and kissed him. Jax froze. Then, he melted into it. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was everything they had held back for years. When they finally pulled apart, Avery rested her forehead against his, her breath unsteady. "You did it," she whispered. Jax exhaled, his hands tightening on her waist. "We did it." Luca bounced beside them, his grin widening. "Does this mean we get to have cake?" Avery laughed softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Yeah, baby. We can have cake." Jax let out a breathless chuckle, pulling both of them in. Because for the first time in his life, he had everything he had ever wanted. And he was never letting go. The end. If you enjoyed this audiobook so far, kindly like and subscribe for more free audiobooks updated weekly. Thanks for listening. Kindly do well to like, subscribe, share and comment. Thanks and see you next time.